Chapter 343. Back in Los Angeles, Joanna parted ways with Eric. Although Eric hoped that the woman could move to the shop corner manor for a while, Joanna did not want to. She did not want to encounter any more awkward situations. However, the woman accepted a small villa in Beverly Hills that Eric bought for her. This was the second villa that Eric had given her. Previously, Famke Jensen had also chosen a villa near Sunset Boulevard in Beverly Hills. However, it was far from the first villa that Eric bought. It was closer to West Hollywood. For Eric's current net worth, a villa worth about $1 million was nothing. Therefore, Eric was looking forward to the day when he could hide his mistress in a better place than Howard Hughes. The first thing that Feng Yu did when he returned to Los Angeles was the release of The Silence of the Lambs. In the past 2 weeks, there were no outstanding box office movies in Hollywood. Compared to last year, the sequel of Raiders of the Lost Ark had a box office of nearly $50 million in the first week. Among the movies that were released in the past 2 weeks, only Total Memories, which was released on June 1st, had a better box office. Total Memories was an action movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was also the first big-budget movie released by Sony Pictures after the establishment of the company. Although this movie had a box office of $36 million in the first week, it still did not meet Sony's expectations. The production cost of Total Memories was $65 million, and the marketing cost was more than $30 million. The North American box office was close to $200 million to recoup its costs. However, from the first week's box office results and the response after the release, this movie did not have the potential to reach $200 million. The other movie, Back to the Future 3, had a drop of 49% in the box office. It only got $14 million. There was no hope for the box office to exceed $100 million. As for the dud released by Disney's Bow-Way International, it was not worth mentioning. Firefly and Disney had spent a lot of effort to divert the public's attention away from the male lead in the movie. The premiere of The Silence of the Lambs was not a big movie. Other than Eric, there were the main actors of the movie, Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, etc. Of course, there were also the 3 producers of the movie, Elizabeth Murdoch, Julia Roberts, and Drew Barrymore. Under Eric's interrogation, the girl told him everything about TG Film. Only then did Eric find out that the girl owned 30% of TG Film shares and that Drew had invested $3 million in The Silence of the Lambs. Of course, this money was secretly transferred from the credit card that Eric had given her. Carolyn Elliott, who was in charge of Eric's personal finances, had mentioned that something was wrong with Drew's credit card. However, Eric didn't care too much as he believed that the girl wouldn't do anything rash. Who would have thought that he would be able to witness such a pleasant surprise? However, if the movie really went according to its original trajectory and won the Best Picture award, then it would be quite lively. That was because the Best Picture award would at most go to the 3 main producers of the movie. However, The Silence of the Lambs happened to have 3 producers, 3 women. The development of the situation was that before the Oscars, after the movie was released in 1,500 theaters on June 8, the 3 female producers of The Silence of the Lambs became the hottest topic in Hollywood in the next few days, just like the movie itself. That was because the producers of a bloody horror movie about cannibals and killers were actually 3 delicate beauties. The contrast was too great. What's more, the main lead of the movie was the famous Hollywood actress, Jodie Foster. Under the influence of this strong topic and the movie itself, The Silence of the Lambs earned $14 million in the first 3 days. Because of the movie's R rating and the limitations of the theaters, this result was already very good. The box office statistics agency estimated that the movie would earn close to $20 million in the first week. Also, because of the good reviews, the movie had a high chance of breaking the 100 million mark after a long run. Here, another sad movie had to be mentioned. It was another dud from Disney, The Rocket Man. This movie had been in the works for several years. It was said that Disney had spent a lot of money to develop a special camera mount for some of the camera effects. Under the influence of Eric's butterfly effect, The Rocket Expert was released a year earlier. Although the male lead remained the same and was still that unknown Bill Campbell, the female lead had changed from Jennifer Connelly in his previous life to Brooke Shousey. Because of the fame brought by the encounter girl in Dark Battle last year, Brooke Shousey received 3 times the salary of Bill Campbell in this movie, even though she played the role of a vase. The tragedy was that this movie, which had a total investment of over $40 million, only earned about $9 million in the first 3 days. It was inevitable that the movie would flop. Although the box office of Sony and Universal's 2 blockbuster movies were not as good as last year's movies, they could recover their costs through overseas distribution. They could also make some money from the post-production video. But Disney's 2 consecutive duds were sure to lose money. The box office in North America was so bad that it would be difficult for them to distribute the movie overseas. Especially the first dud movie. With that kind of result, they could forget about distributing the movie overseas. For this reason, Eric studied the other Disney movies that will be released this summer. Other than Ghost, which was co-distributed with Firefly, Eric had no impression of the other movies. It seems that Disney's financial report for the next quarter will be very bad. Fong Yu wondered how Michael Eisner would react. After The Silence of the Lambs, Firefly's next movie, Sleeping with the Enemy, was promoted even more aggressively. Of course, all this was done by Robert Shaye himself. Because of his resentment towards Robert Shaye, Eric decided not to ask about it. Anyway, this movie will be a success, and he just needs to wait for the money to come in. Although he didn't have to worry about Sleeping with the Enemy, Eric didn't have much free time because he had promised Cameron's current wife, Kathryn Bigelow, that he would personally be the producer of Point Shock. At that moment, he had no choice but to worry about this movie. Chapter 344. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, a sports car arrived at the entrance of the Pointy Corner Manor. Kathryn Bigelow took a deep breath with lingering fear and complained to Cameron, who was sitting in the driver's seat, "Jim, if you drive so fast on the way back, I'll never sit in the same car as you again." "I thought you'd like this kind of thrill." Cameron looked at his wife's frightened look and said with a little smugness. At the same time, he pressed the horn hard. Having made an appointment in advance, the Manor's security guards quickly opened the door when they saw the Camerons in the car. After the sports car drove into the Manor, Kathryn Bigelow said, "Do you know how fast you were driving just now? You're joking with your own safety. I don't like it. I really don't like it." "All right, Kate. I apologize." Cameron shrugged insincerely and looked at the scenery of the Pointy Corner Manor outside the car window. He said enviously, "Hey, what do you think about building a manor like this in the future?" Kathryn Bigelow knew that her husband was changing the topic again. She said somewhat helplessly, "When do you think you'll be able to earn $30 million? Cameron said confidently, "Maybe in the next movie." "If you don't overspend, it's still possible," Kathryn Bigelow teased again. Cameron was already considered an A-list director after a few popular movies such as Terminator and Alien 2. Other than the fixed director's salary, he could also enjoy a share of the movie's profits. However, with Cameron's extreme pursuit of perfection when making movies, he would often reduce his share in exchange for an extra budget from the producers in the end. Other than the Terminator that only had a fixed investment of over $6 million, the subsequent Alien 2 and Abyss were all in the same situation. The Titanic and Avatar in his previous life were no exception. Especially Titanic, Cameron almost had a mental breakdown from the pressure of the constantly rising cost, but he still did not give up his pursuit of perfection and burned the cost all the way to more than $200 million. Just as he got out of the car, Cameron looked at the city of freedom that shone with silver light under the morning sun and exclaimed, "It's really suitable to be filmed in a movie. I must film it in a movie." Kathryn Bigelow took out a satchel from the back seat of the car and slung it over her shoulder as she casually said, "We'll need that little guy's approval." "He'll definitely agree," Cameron said. He couldn't help but stretch out his arms and form a square with his fingers to encircle the mansion, wondering what angle would be the best. "All right, let's go in. We have a lot to talk about today." Kathryn Bigelow tugged at Cameron's sleeve, and Cameron reluctantly followed his wife to the villa's entrance. Before they could press the doorbell, they heard a woman's laughter coming from the east. "Looks like they're over there." Cameron lifted his chin and led his wife around the barrier formed by tall holly trees. They saw the figures of a man and a woman on the tennis court. When Catherine Bigelow saw Eric, who was wearing a white tennis uniform, dealing with the woman's tricky attacks with a racket, a gloating smile appeared on her lips. However, Cameron was attracted by the tall and strong figure opposite Eric. The woman was wearing a tight black sports singlet and hot pants, revealing her slender and fit figure. Her long dark brown hair was casually tied into a ponytail, and her slightly hard face had a hint of unruliness and wildness. Tall, fit, wild, unruliness. Every feature of the woman completely matched Cameron's definition of sexy. Even with his wife standing beside him, Cameron could not help but reveal a hint of fanaticism in his eyes. Seeing the Camerons appear, Eric ignored Farmick Jensen's tricky boundary shot. As though he had seen his savior, he threw down the tennis racket in his hand and walked towards them. The woman on the court was about to say something in dissatisfaction when she saw Eric point in her direction. The woman turned her head and saw the Camerons. She put her tennis racket aside and walked over with Eric. "Jim, Kate, I thought you wouldn't be here until 10 o'clock, Eric said, greeting Cameron and Catherine. "If we were a little later, we might not be able to see Eric in such a sorry state," Catherine Bigelow could not help but tease him. Eric smiled awkwardly and introduced her to the Camerons. "This is my girlfriend, Farmick Jensen." Although she knew that Eric had left out the word "one of," Farmick Jensen was still very happy. She warmly shook hands with Cameron and Catherine Bigelow. Eric also noticed the strange look in Cameron's eyes when he looked at Farmick Jensen. He quickly understood Cameron's thoughts and smiled. He reached out to hug the girl's smooth waist and caressed it twice. He asked Cameron, "Jim, isn't Farmick very suitable to be the female lead in your movie?" Of course, if the female lead for Terminator 2 hadn't been confirmed, I would definitely have invited Miss Farmick Jensen. "That's a pity," Eric replied with a smile. At the same time, he could not help but glance at Catherine Bigelow. The female lead of Terminator 2, Linda Hamilton, was the cause of the couple's divorce. During the filming of Terminator 2 in his previous life, the scandal between Cameron and Linda Hamilton had caused a stir. After Terminator 2 was released, Cameron divorced Catherine Bigelow, who had been married for less than 2 years. Speaking of which, Catherine Bigelow was also one of the few beautiful directors in Hollywood. Even 20 years later, when she stepped onto the podium of the Dolby Theatre as the first female director of the Oscars, the Iron Lady of Hollywood still looked like she was in her 30s. But in fact, Catherine Bigelow was now 39 years old. The degree of maintenance of her appearance and figure was enough to make a large number of female stars in Hollywood who had been disfigured by injections go crazy with jealousy. The two women quickly noticed that the man beside them was looking at the woman opposite them. Catherine Bigelow discreetly kicked Cameron with the tip of her foot, while Farmick Jensen reached out to hug Eric and pinched his waist. "Ah!" Eric subconsciously raised his hand in pain, wanting to give the woman a slap, but he quickly realized that this was not the right place. He could only say, "Then, let's go inside and talk." "Yes, yes," Cameron quickly agreed. Back at the villa, Eric hurriedly took a shower and changed his clothes. He brought the Camerons, who were drinking coffee by the floor-to-ceiling window, to the study on the basement floor. Chapter 345. Because it was rarely cleaned up, the study was even messier. Books, drafts, folders, and other items were piled up on the tables. The entire wall on the west side was also covered with drafts. Walking down the spiral staircase, Cameron and Catherine Bigelow were simultaneously attracted by the wall of split-screen sketches and various drafts. "Eric, did you do all this?" Cameron asked in disbelief after the couple roughly read through the contents of the manuscripts from south to north, because the contents of the manuscripts were too shocking. Although most of the manuscripts were shot scripts for sketches, there was also content that involved all aspects of movie production. Cameron even saw a large portion of the manuscripts that involved movie special effects. Sensing the Cameron surprise, Eric was very satisfied. Although he had already decided to work with the Camerons, Eric could also see that although his films were selling well, Cameron still had some contempt for him. He even clearly regarded him as a fool with a lot of money on Terminator 2. Although Eric generally did not care too much about other people's opinions of him, it was necessary to show enough strength to maintain a long-term cooperation with an unruly person like Cameron. "This is my film plan for the next few years," In fact, I have occasionally started doing it when I was in New York. What you see is the result of my work during this period. When Cameron and Catherine Bigelow heard Eric's words, they once again turned their gazes to the wall filled with manuscripts. Just now, the two of them had only taken a cursory look. Only then did Cameron notice the contents of the split-screen sketches. A terrifying tornado swept up an entire house, a huge Tyrannosaurus Rex chased an off-road vehicle, a tsunami hundreds of meters high rushed to New York City, and Washington, D.C. was shrouded in a shadow. The more Cameron and Catherine Bigelow looked at it, the more surprised they became. In this era, these scenes usually only appeared in comics or novels, but now it seemed that Eric clearly wanted to bring these scenes to the big screen with the intention of live-action movies. Catherine Bigelow was still calm, but Cameron's eyes revealed an undisguised fanaticism. He felt that a new era seemed to be opening. After looking through the split-screen sketches again, Cameron asked, "Eric, how do you plan to shoot these ideas into a movie? I mean, do you have a detailed feasibility plan?" "Of course," Eric explained. "I will use the next 10 years or so to create 2 main series. In addition to the Jurassic Park series adapted from the novel I published 2 years ago, the other is a disaster film series." Disaster film series? Cameron once again turned his gaze to the sketches. Eric walked to Cameron's side, pointed at some of the sketches, and explained in detail, "Yes, it's a disaster movie series that includes at least 5 movies. Look, this is a script called Tornado, which mainly describes a group of fanatical scientists chasing and researching tornadoes. This is a concept about an alien invasion of Earth, temporarily named Poison Day, but it seems that this name involves another copyright, and I don't know if it can be successfully obtained. Also, this is a concept about a comet hitting Earth, where mankind is facing destruction. The script is called Collision of Heaven and Earth. Finally, here is a story about the rapid global temperature drop, and half of the United States is frozen. I called it The Day After Tomorrow, meaning that we never know what will happen tomorrow." Cameron and Catherine Bigelow listened attentively to Eric's explanation. After Eric finished speaking, Cameron reached out and stroked the sketches on the wall. After thinking for a long time, he asked, "Eric, how do you plan to achieve these? Is it possible with the current technology?" "Of course, as long as you're willing to spend money," Eric said confidently. "Actually, these 2 series involve the 2 development directions of future special effects movies in my imagination. I've already talked to Stan and Ed several times. I just returned from New York a few days ago, and I even made a special trip to San Francisco for these things." Even with Cameron's craziness, he still found it unbelievable when he imagined Eric's Jurassic Park and disaster film series in his mind. As a technical director, Cameron was very clear about the extent of the current special effects technology. Therefore, he knew that although Eric's movies could definitely be produced if they were forcefully shot, each of them would definitely cost a lot. Even Catherine Bigelow couldn't help but think that the little guy in front of her seemed to be crazier than her husband. Cameron didn't seem to be too interested in the Jurassic Park series. Instead, he excitedly discussed the possibility of making a disaster film series with Eric. "Eric, look, according to what you said, Tornado has relatively simple special effects. How do you plan to realistically show a tornado on the screen? As far as I know, the most advanced special effects of industrial light and magic are still very difficult to realistically show a tornado on the screen." Eric turned around and pulled out a document from his desk and handed it to James Cameron. Cameron looked at the cover of the document and felt a little surprised. This should be very important to Eric. However, since Eric gave it to him, Cameron didn't refuse and directly opened it to read. Catherine Bigelow also curiously moved closer to her husband to read the contents of the document. The document in front of them was a proposal to commission a research team led by a famous physicist from Stanford University to develop a set of fluid simulation software. The purpose of this fluid simulation software was to achieve special effects such as smoke, flowing water, and strong winds on the computer. While the Camerons were reading the document in front of them, Eric said, "Professor Ron Fedicus from Stanford University has already confirmed the feasibility of this plan. The research and development work has already begun. It will take about half a year for the software to be ready for use. When that time comes, the scenes of tornadoes, tsunamis, explosions, smoke, and so on in the disaster films I mentioned can all be achieved through this software. In addition, Ed Kamal is now preparing a research team in Los Angeles. They plan to develop a 3D modeling software. This software can achieve scenes such as collapsing buildings and destroying cities. Also, Ed Kamal will be optimizing Pixar's original rendering software, RenderMan, so that this software can be adapted to the rendering work of live-action movies. Chapter 346. Cameron knew about rendering software. Simply put, the function of this kind of software was to perform complex calculations on the lighting, material, color, and other aspects of a computer-generated rendering image. It made the image more realistic, to the point where it was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects production company of Abyss, was now using the RenderMan rendering software developed by Ed Kamal. When Ed Kamal was still at Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas had the foresight to buy the permanent use of this software. After Jobs bought the animation department of Industrial Light and Magic to form Pixar, Ed Kamal placed the software in Pixar and obtained a certain amount of equity. But as Jobs continued to inject funds into the loss-making Pixar, the equity of several Pixar managers was eventually taken back by Jobs, and the RenderMan software became the property of Pixar. When Eric wanted to take over Pixar from Steve Jobs, Jobs also tried to strip the RenderMan software from the list of properties of Pixar Studios, but he failed in the end, which showed the value of this software. After reading the development plan for the fluid simulation software and understanding the general situation of the RenderMan rendering software, Cameron immediately had a strong interest in the 3D modeling software Eric just mentioned. From Eric's words just now, Cameron keenly felt that the 3D modeling software mentioned by Eric was the most important part of this plan. The detailed plan hasn't been discussed in San Francisco yet. I originally planned to commission Autodesk to develop this software, but we didn't reach an agreement on the ownership of the software. In the end, I had to do it myself, Eric explained to Cameron's curiosity. Autodesk? Cameron asked in confusion. It's the industrial design software development company that developed the famous AutoCAD software, Eric said again. According to the information in his memory, several major 3D animation design software in his previous life, Maya, 3D Max, and Softimage, were all products of Autodesk. Autodesk almost monopolized this type of film and television special effects software. But even if history didn't change, it would be more than a decade later. Right now, Autodesk was still focused on the development and management of AutoCAD, an industrial design software. As computer film and television special effects were just emerging, Autodesk wasn't interested at all in the development of 3D animation software for film and television special effects. They believed that this kind of professional software didn't have much commercial potential. The reason why Eric wanted to entrust Autodesk to develop it was mainly because Autodesk had nearly 10 years of 3D design software development technical accumulation, which could greatly reduce the development time of 3D modeling software. However, although Autodesk was not interested in this kind of software, he still wanted to share the ownership of the software with Eric. In the end, the two sides did not come to an agreement, and Eric could only organize his own team to develop it. Hearing Eric mention AutoCAD, Cameron remembered. After asking a series of detailed questions, Cameron finally asked, "Eric, how much do you intend to invest in these plans?" "I think it must be a huge expense. The development of the fluid simulation software and the optimization of RenderMan don't require too much money. $30 million is enough. The most important thing is still Maya. This software requires continuous investment. However, I believe that it will definitely bring me sufficient returns in the future." Maya, are you referring to the name of the 3D modeling software you mentioned? I didn't expect you to be interested in the mysterious Maya civilization. Eric explained, the Maya here doesn't refer to the Maya civilization in South America. It's the pronunciation of an ancient Indian word, which means dream. This name is really appropriate, Cameron said with a smile. Of course. In fact, 3D modeling is only the most basic function of Maya. In my plan, I will continue to add 3D animation, simulation, special effects, and other functions in the future. It will also be connected with the RenderMan rendering software to form a complete special effects production process, Eric said confidently. Of course, This was only his ambition in terms of technology. The main reason why there were so many mainstream and non-mainstream special effects software in his previous life was mainly because of the rise of computer special effects in the past 10 years. Most software giants were not optimistic about the commercial prospects of this type of software. Many veteran special effects companies could only research and develop it themselves. By the time the software giants saw the huge commercial value of special effects software, the market had become very diverse. It was almost impossible to monopolize the market. But now, Eric had made this move much earlier than many people. Moreover, he did not intend to let the digital domain monopolize Maya. Instead, he planned to introduce the software to the market after the software's design was mature, and he ensured that the digital domain's technology was absolutely superior. He believed that when there was a mature special effects software available, not many special effects companies would be willing to research and develop it themselves. This was only the first step. With the development of the digital domain and the promotion of the Maya software, many special effects solutions and special effects plugins would slowly be developed based on the Maya software. Just like how many software applications were developed based on the Windows operating system, it would eventually become a strong binding effect. When that time came, even if the software giants wanted to get involved in the software field, the status of Maya software in the film and television special effects industry was equivalent to the status of the Windows operating system. Even if the software giants had the funds, technology, and ability, they could only stare at this fat piece of meat with a production value of tens of billions of dollars. It was always troublesome for a woman to clean up. When Eric returned from the tennis court, it only took him about 10 minutes to shower and change his clothes. However, it took Famke Jensen more than half an hour to bring a pot of coffee into the study. The girl had already changed out of her hot tank top and hot pants. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt and khaki slacks. Her hair was still slightly wet, and she had put on light makeup. "Mr. Cameron, Ms. Bigelow, do you need coffee?" Famke Jensen asked as he poured the coffee. Catherine Bigelow, who was standing by the wall and admiring Eric's sketches, turned around and nodded with a smile. She even took the initiative to help. Cameron, who had just been stunned by Famke, had lost all interest in the beauty. He was excitedly discussing the special effects of the disaster film series with Eric. When he heard Famke's question, he only nodded slightly and didn't even look over. "Ms. Jensen, don't mind him. Jim is like that. Once he's focused on something, he won't care about anything else," Catherine Bigelow said apologetically when she saw Cameron ignoring Famke. Famke Jensen served 2 cups of coffee to Cameron and Eric, returned to the sofa, and sat down before saying, "It's nothing. Actually, Eric is like that sometimes. Once, I saw him frowning as he paced back and forth by the window. I went up to ask what was wrong, but Eric seemed to have been jolted awake and became very angry. He said that I had chased away his inspiration." After Famke Jensen said that, the 2 women looked at each other and felt a sense of empathy for each other. Perhaps because of this, the 2 women quickly chatted and even affectionately called each other by their nicknames. Chapter 347. Did you know, Kate? My full name is Famke Berman Jensen. Actually, my nickname is Fongji. That's what my parents call me, but Eric keeps calling me Famke. A few days ago, I couldn't help but correct him. Then, he said that he wasn't wrong and even found a bunch of excuses. That was really interesting. Haha. Catherine Bigelow glanced at the 2 men, then leaned over to Famke Jensen. "He's just a kid who just turned 20. It's inevitable that he's a little willful." "A little bastard is more like it," Famke Jensen said in an intimate tone unique to couples. Catherine Bigelow also whispered, "Actually, Jim is the same. Both of them are paranoid." "Hey, Famke, both of my ears have a hearing of 1. 5. Don't think I can't hear you." Eric, who was discussing special effects with Cameron, suddenly looked up and gave Famke Jensen a threatening look. Cameron also looked up at his wife with a smirk. Catherine Bigelow glared back unhappily. "Today, we're supposed to be discussing point. The 2 of you are wasting my time. I didn't even say anything, so what right do you have to express your dissatisfaction?" Eric looked at his watch. It was already 10:15. Cameron and his wife had come over at 9, and more than an hour had passed. Cameron also realized this and said reluctantly, "Eric, can you show me the scripts for those disaster movies? Then, you can discuss the movie with Kate." "Of course." Eric opened the safe and took out the scripts for Tornado and a few other movies. He handed them to Cameron. "I don't plan on directing all of these movies myself. Take a look. If you're interested, perhaps you can choose to direct one yourself." Cameron nodded non-committally. Although he was very interested in the concept of these movies, whether or not they could cooperate in the end depended on the quality of the scripts and Eric's conditions. Because of the Piranha 2 incident, Cameron hated it when others told him what to do with his movies. Eric was clearly a guy with a strong desire for control. If Eric didn't give him enough control, Cameron wouldn't take over the project even if he was very interested. After receiving Eric's script, Cameron couldn't wait to flip open the first page of Tornado, and quickly immersed himself in the plot. Eric came to the sofa and sat down beside Famke Jensen. He said to Catherine Bigelow, "Ma, I'm Bigelow, let me take a look at the script for Point Shock." Catherine Bigelow took out the script for Shock Point from the satchel she always carried with her and handed it over. At the same time, it came with a copy of 7 or 8 pages. The top is the script. The bottom is the budget that Jim and I came up with these days. It's about $20 million. A budget of $20 million was very conservative for this project. However, Catherine Bigelow's tone still carried a faint lack of confidence. The few movies she directed before only had a budget of $2 to $3 million. Eric put the budget aside and flipped open the script to read. The male lead was a man named Johnny Utah. He was originally a football player with a bright future. Because of a knee injury, he had to give up this career. After graduating from the police academy, he became an agent in the FBI. Eric felt that this setting was very interesting because the male lead that Catherine Bigelow liked was Keanu Reeves. In reality, Keanu Reeves was originally a hockey player with a bright future. Because of a knee injury, he eventually changed careers to become an actor. A group of crazy bank robbers appeared in Los Angeles. They wore masks of the previous presidents of the United States and robbed more than 20 banks in a row. However, because these people were very restrained and didn't covet the bank's vaults, they only took all the cash in the bank's counters in a short 90 seconds and left in a hurry. Their methods were neat and didn't leave too many traces. Therefore, they frequently succeeded. The FBI was helpless. The young, frivolous, and passionate Johnny Utah convinced his boss, Angelo Pappas, an old fox of the FBI who was always immersed in the glory of the past. The two of them embarked on a journey together to hunt down this group of crazy fugitives. From the clues accumulated from more than 20 bank robberies in the past, Angelo Pappas locked the identity of the bank robbers on a group of surfers. In order to get close to the surfers at Los Angeles' Largo Beach, Johnny Utah began to learn how to surf. He also fabricated an identity that both his parents were dead to get close to the beautiful surfing coach, Taylor Dickett. While the two of them developed feelings for each other, Johnny got to know the crazy surfing enthusiast, Bobby, through Taylor. Johnny soon discovered that Bobby and his companions were most likely the bank robbers. He finally confirmed this through Bobby's whereabouts. However, Bobby and his companions escaped from Johnny and Angelo in the process of robbing another bank. Johnny's identity as an FBI agent was thus exposed. Because he didn't leave behind sufficient evidence, Johnny couldn't directly arrest Bobby and his companions. After a discussion with his companions, Bobby kidnapped Johnny's girlfriend, Taylor, and used this to threaten Johnny to do as he said. Bordy took Johnny to rob a bank for the last time and parachuted together. In the end, Johnny's desperate and crazy nature was aroused, and he resonated with Bordy. During the last arrest, Johnny released the handcuffs on Bobby's hands and let Bobby run on his surfboard towards the astronomical tide that occurred once in 50 years in Australia. He also threw his FBI agent badge into the sea. Although many points of view in the script were a little far-fetched, overall, this was a story of self-pursuit. Johnny Utah originally thought that his goal was to become a top FBI agent. For this, he would do anything, such as fabricating the lie that both his parents were dead to get close to Taylor without any pressure. However, in the end, Johnny realized that becoming an elite FBI agent wasn't what he wanted. It would only make him like his boss, Angelo Pappas. Angelo Pappas was an elite FBI agent. In order to explore the use of a certain essential oil left behind by the robber Sauls, Angelo Pappas studied hundreds of essential oils and even became an expert in this field. However, he was still a loser who couldn't get promoted. Instead, his colleagues who were younger and more mediocre than him were all riding on his head. Chapter 348. Johnny let Borty go at the edge of the upcoming astronomical tide in Australia. When he heard his colleagues swearing that they would arrest Borty when he returned, Johnny muttered to himself, "He's not coming back." After finding Borty, Johnny had completed the first and last mission of his FBI career. He had fulfilled the wish of the deceased Angelo. After that, he threw away his FBI badge and began to search for himself. Or perhaps, he was walking towards confusion. Unlike Johnny, Borty knew his goal from the beginning. He led his partners around the world in search of higher, bigger, and more dangerous waves. He burned his passion and pursued the most natural wildness. They lived unscrupulously, disobeyed the system of power, and did not follow moral principles. In this spirit-killing world, they created their own system. However, this system was destined not to be tolerated by the real world. The moment Johnny Utah, who represented the rules of reality, entered their lives, they were destined to be destroyed. The moment he finished reading the script, Eric understood why he had not seen this movie in his previous life. The free and rebellious views expressed in Thriller were incompatible with the conservative lifestyle of most Easterners. It was destined that this movie would not be recognized by many people. Without recognition, it would be difficult to spread. It could only be regarded as a classic in a small circle. Seeing Eric put down the script, Catherine Bigelow immediately perked up and prepared to deal with the various problems Eric might have with the script. However, Eric did not do so. Instead, he picked up the budget and continued reading. $20 million is not enough. Eric finished reading the budget and looked up at Catherine Bigelow and said, "If we shoot it exactly according to the script, the large number of skydiving scenes and surfing stunts will definitely raise the cost to $30 million. Including the post-production publicity costs, this movie will need $80 million to recoup its cost." $80 million? Catherine Bigelow was stunned. The total box office of her last movie, Thunderbolt Blue Angel, was only a little over $8 million. Although compared to Thunderbolt Blue Angel, which cost less than $3 million, the movie also made money for the investors. However, when she heard that her movie needed $80 million to recoup its cost, Catherine Bigelow felt uneasy. At the end of the day, she was just a woman. She didn't have Cameron's crazy and reckless personality, not to mention that even Cameron had moments when he was on the verge of collapse. Not everyone could bear the burden of $80 million at the box office as soon as they started shooting. It was only 1990. In this era, Hollywood produced hundreds of movies every year, but there were usually no more than 10 movies that grossed more than $100 million each year, and no more than 20 movies that grossed more than $80 million. Furthermore, Catherine Bigelow knew very well that Shock Point wasn't a Hollywood commercial film. This made her subconsciously glance at Cameron. She had only wanted to film an artistic film that satirized the federal system and exposed human nature. There weren't many surfing and parachuting scenes in it. In that case, the cost wouldn't even exceed $10 million. However, the script in front of him was made with Cameron's help. There was no doubt that those big scenes were added under Cameron's instigation. Eric took in all of Catherine Bigelow's subtle actions as she glanced at Cameron. At the same time, he confirmed his guess. He had previously watched Catherine Bigelow's previous films, Night of the Bloody Corpse and Thunderbolt Blue Angel, so he was very clear about Catherine Bigelow's style of work. Therefore, when he read the script, he could basically guess which plot was inserted by Cameron. "Eric, the script can still be adjusted to reduce some unnecessary scenes. In that case, $20 million will be enough," Catherine Bigelow said. She lowered her head slightly and picked up the script in front of Eric. She flipped through it a few times and quickly put it down. Eric didn't know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to see Catherine Bigelow blush slightly when she spoke. Recalling the woman's small action of flipping through the script, Eric confirmed that he hadn't seen wrongly. Catherine Bigelow's face had just turned red. Clearly, the woman was using Cameron's old trick. First, she had confirmed the movie. As for the subsequent filming, she would let the investors decide what to do after the money was spent. However, Catherine Bigelow clearly wasn't as thick-skinned as Cameron, which was why she had such an unnatural expression. But I think this script is very good. It doesn't need any changes. Eric took the script back and imitated Catherine Bigelow's actions as he flipped through it a few times. Then. Catherine Bigelow looked up happily. If Eric was very satisfied with the script, then the investment definitely wouldn't be a problem. However, when the woman looked up and saw Eric imitating her action of flipping through the script, she immediately blushed. She realized that Eric was doing it on purpose. This little guy had clearly seen through the intentions in her words. Eric originally wanted to tease her a little more, but when he saw Catherine Bigelow's slightly embarrassed appearance, he swallowed his words. After all, he had already taken the initiative. Besides, Catherine Bigelow didn't look as domineering as James Cameron. Well, Kate, we'll make appropriate adjustments to the budget when we film in the future. Now, let's talk about the script. I want to know what your position is for point shock, or rather, what are you trying to express? If she was a sophisticated person, she would have understood that Eric had just said those words about the budget to take the initiative in the negotiation. However, Catherine Bigelow, who was usually very bad at communicating, didn't realize this. Hearing Eric's words, the woman quickly perked up and said, "I'm more inclined to think that this is a sports movie, a story about the pursuit of freedom. At the end of the story, the characters in the movie get their own place. Taylor forgives Johnny, Angelo dies under the wall of robbers, Johnny leaves the FBI, and Bobby loses all his partners and rushes to the sea without hesitation." Eric nodded slightly. "What about the robbery with the president's portrait?" "Eric, first of all, I want to make it clear that describing such behavior doesn't mean that I approve of it. Of course, I can understand this. Otherwise, those directors who make murderous movies would be locked up. No, this is different. Those movie directors use bloody scenes to satisfy the fishing net deep in the human heart, but I just want to convey my point of view to people. Well, she's a literary young woman. A beautiful, introverted, and unsociable literary young woman. She's so lovely." When Eric heard the woman's seriousness, he couldn't help but have this thought. He then said, "Kate, you can see from some of the lines that what you want to convey should be a satire on the federal system. However, have you ever thought that the audience hates preaching the most? So, we just need to express these meanings in the story. Saying it directly would be inferior. Look here." After Eric finished speaking, he flipped open the script and quickly found a page. He spread the script on the coffee table between the two of them. Catherine Bigelow leaned forward slightly and finally half knelt on the ground. She tilted her head to listen to Eric's point of view. Famke Jensen, who had been sitting quietly by the side, gradually noticed the two of them together. He subconsciously looked at Cameron and saw that Cameron was sitting in Eric's office chair with his back facing them, flipping through the script in front of him. Although they hadn't spent much time together, Famke Jensen believed that he had a certain understanding of Eric. At this moment, he noticed that Eric seemed to be unconsciously huddled together with Catherine Bigelow. He acutely sensed that the little bastard was definitely interested in the woman opposite him. This was because Famke knew that the more serious Eric appeared, the more likely he was harboring evil thoughts. How bold! Her husband is sitting in the house. Furthermore, this woman's age. TSK. Famke Jensen watched with interest for a while before raising his wrist and pretending to look at his watch. He said, "Eric, it's already 11 o'clock. Do you want me to prepare lunch?" Eric, who was suddenly interrupted, didn't show any displeasure. Instead, he said to Catherine Bigelow, "Kate, what do you and Jim like to eat? I'll get Famke to prepare it." As expected, Famke Jensen confirmed in his heart. If Eric was really discussing the script with Catherine Bigelow without any distractions, with Eric's character, he would definitely be unhappy with his sudden interruption. However, the little bastard didn't show any displeasure on his face. Catherine Bigelow, who was discussing the script with Eric, had an unnatural expression on her face when she was suddenly interrupted. However, she didn't show any displeasure. Hearing Eric's question, Catherine Bigelow said, "Anything is fine. Jim and I aren't particular about such things." Eric then said to Famke Jensen, "Then call for some takeout, according to the menu we often order." "Right, help us get 2 pens first." Famke Jensen stood up and walked to the desk to take out 2 pens from the pen holder. At the same time, he glanced at Cameron. Cameron was staring at the script with a slight frown. He had a pensive look on his face, as if he was thinking about how to achieve a certain scene. Clearly, he didn't have any feelings for the woman beside him. Famke really wanted to remind Cameron of something, but he wasn't completely ignorant of Cameron. This great director was said to have been married 3 times. Clearly, he was also a playboy. Since that was the case, some of the thoughts that had just arisen in Famke's mind dissipated. He handed the pens to Eric and Catherine. The 2 of them took the pens and quickly began writing and drawing on the script. Famke looked at it for a while before shrugging and walking out of the study. James Cameron and Catherine Bigelow stayed in Eric's villa for an entire day. Eric and Catherine Bigelow discussed the filming details of Point Shock in detail. At the same time, Cameron also read through a few of Eric's disaster movie scripts. In the end, Cameron developed a strong interest in the script of Toxic Day, but he didn't confirm it. The script of Toxic Day was indeed very suitable for Cameron. The multi-story narrative was very similar to the Terminator series. Eric believed that Cameron would definitely be able to make this movie more exciting than Roland Emmerich's. However, Eric wasn't without concerns. As a blockbuster with special effects, Toxic Day's budget was astonishing even without Cameron. If Cameron were to take over, Eric was certain that the movie's budget would at least double or even approach $200 million. In his memory, the North American box office of Terminator 2 was only $200 million. Poison Day and Terminator 2 were the same. They didn't have much substance. It was just a pure popcorn movie. Obviously, it didn't have the potential to explode in the box office like Titanic. Without absolute certainty, Eric would not rashly hand over Poison Day to Cameron, because Firefly's position in Hollywood had just been established. If the $200 million investment in the box office failed, it would definitely hurt them. After all, Cameron wasn't omnipotent. Just like Abyss, the investment was $80 million, but the box office was only $80 million. Although the subsequent overseas and DVD releases could recover the cost, the profit was destined not to be too much. In the following days, Eric discussed some things about Point Shock with Catherine Bigelow. The preparations for Terminator 2 were also proceeding in an orderly manner. Moreover, when they invited Schwarzenegger to act, there were some problems. Although Schwarzenegger was also an artist of ICM, he obviously didn't have much of a friendship with Eric. For the invitation of Terminator 2, the other party's agent offered a sky-high price of $15 million. It was indeed a sky-high price. One must know that in this era, the usual salary of a Hollywood superstar was only about $5 million. Schwarzenegger was equivalent to tripling the average price in one breath. Of course, Eric wouldn't agree. The 2 sides were in a stalemate. Although Schwarzenegger himself relented under Cameron's mediation, he still didn't give in much. Moreover, Schwarzenegger wasn't even very interested in acting in Terminator 2. Eric had someone investigate in detail and found out the truth of the matter. It turned out that the root of the problem was the Germans. The Germans, that's right. However, speaking of which, it wasn't something that could be explained in a few sentences. It involved a lot of things, even starting from the merger of East and West Germany. It turned out that since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the merger of East and West Germany, in order to integrate the 2 countries economically as soon as possible, Germany inevitably issued a large amount of currency, causing a certain degree of inflation. The appreciation of the Deutsche Mark, just like the appreciation of the Japanese yen, would definitely cause domestic capital to flow to the international market. Of course, this was only the root. The next step was the tax reform. The income tax for high-income people in Germany was as high as 51%. The rich people had to pay the tax every year. In order to promote the development of the German film industry, Germany encouraged Germans to invest in film production. As long as Germans invested their income into films, not only would they not have to pay income tax, but they would also receive a certain percentage of tax rebates. Moreover, unlike other countries that had to hire local film professionals to film in their own country, Germany's policy stipulated that films didn't even need to be shot in Germany. Under the incentive of such policies, large sums of money from Germany quickly flowed to Hollywood. Moreover, these investors did not think themselves to be stupid. They were not interested in low-budget movies at all. Instead, they aimed at movies with big investments and big stars. With the help of some powerful producers in Hollywood, the Germans quickly set their sights on stars like Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger and the others' salaries also increased, and they all offered a sky-high salary of $15 million to the Germans. Terminator 2 happened to run into this trend of rising prices. Chapter 349. On the desk, 8 small packets of tissues were neatly placed in the rectangular gift box. They were exactly the same as the tissues sold in the market for tens of cents. However, these tissue paper boxes were made of paper, just like cigarette boxes. The packaging was quite exquisite. Eric picked up a packet and looked at it. On the front, there was a poster of Ghost printed. On the bottom right corner was the logo of the manufacturer, Kleenex, and a number. On the back, there were carefully selected stills. The other 7 packets in the gift box were roughly the same, but the posters and stills on both sides were different. A complete set of 8. This was a promotional plan that Eric came up with based on his memory of when Ghost was released. Some cinemas specially gave women tissues to wipe their tears. Moreover, the reason why he went through so much trouble to make the packaging paper instead of the commonly seen plastic packaging on the market, and designed 8 completely different packaging, was to maximize the benefits of this marketing. Most people had a hobby of collecting. If Ghost was a bad movie, then this set of packaging would definitely have no point in collecting it. However, Ghost was destined to become a classic, so this set of paper tissue paper boxes was very collectible. Moreover, it didn't seem difficult to collect a set of 8. It didn't even require a person to go to the cinema to watch it 8 times. As long as they could communicate with their relatives and friends, they might be able to get a complete set of packaging from their relatives and friends who had watched the movie. Of course, Eric wouldn't let people get a complete set too easily. Everyone knew that things that couldn't be obtained were more precious. Therefore, not only would one package be distributed to cinemas every week from 1 to 6, but packages and would only produce 10,000 boxes each, and they would be randomly distributed between 1 to 6. 10,000 boxes might seem like a lot, but if they were distributed to the 2,000 cinemas in North America, it would be very rare. Moreover, these were not available on the market. Although Kleenex had obtained the corresponding authorization of Ghost and could print some portraits of Ghost on their products, the production of these paper gifts would stop after Ghost was released. The cost of the small box of tissue paper in front of Zhong Hang was about 10 cents. According to the North American box office of Ghost in his previous life, if they were only given to women, they would need to give away 10 million boxes. The total value would only be $1 million. Including the distribution of the tissue paper in North America, the total cost would definitely not exceed $2 million. Although $2 million was indeed a little too much compared to the $10 million marketing budget of Ghost, it wasn't funded by Firefly or Disney. Instead, it was funded by advertising sponsorship. The sponsor was Kleenex, which was printed on the box. It was the largest tissue paper manufacturer in North America and even the world. When Firefly threw out the proposal and launched an advertising tender, Kleenex won the title sponsorship of the promotion at a high price of $1 million. At the same time, they were willing to bear the production and distribution costs of another $2 million. Compared to the annual advertising and marketing expenses of a global high-end tissue manufacturer, $3 million was not a lot. However, the risk of this deal was not small. If Ghost failed at the box office, it would be difficult for the advertising campaign to achieve the desired effect. However, Kleenex did not dare to risk letting a competitor win the contract. The case of Lamborghini's successful product placement in Pretty Woman was still vivid in their minds. A sports car brand that was originally in trouble and was bought by Chrysler became one of the most famous sports car brands in North America and even the world after the successful advertising campaign of Pretty Woman. Michael Lynn, who was sitting opposite Eric, looked at Eric calmly inspecting the small packet of tissue paper in front of him. He felt a little nervous. He used to be the president of New Line and served as Robert Shea's deputy for 10 years. His current position was also one of the presidents of Firefly. He was in charge of Firefly's most important film distribution department. When he was at New Line, Robert Shea liked to monopolize power and did not have much use for him as his deputy. However, Robert Shea did not treat him badly. In private, the two were very good friends. When New Line merged with Firefly, Michael Lynn had always regarded himself as Robert Shea's confidant. During this period, Robert Shea focused on Sleeping with the Enemy and neglected the distribution of Firefly's other films. Michael Lynn had always been aware of this. He had also secretly hinted to Robert Shea that it was best not to go overboard. However, Robert Shea obviously did not listen to him. Michael Lynn knew that Robert Shea wanted to become the second Michael Eisner. However, as an outsider, Michael Lynn knew that Robert Shea had obviously overlooked a fact. In Disney, Michael Eisner was the most outstanding one. It was Michael Eisner who had led Disney step by step from a small family-run film company to a Hollywood movie giant. That was why he could sit in the position of Disney's CEO. However, in Firefly, Robert Shea was not the most dazzling one. What's more, Robert Shea's shares were not enough to compete with Eric. The 72% shares in Eric's hands had absolute control over Firefly. In a situation where he did not care about the consequences, he could oust Robert Shea at any time. Therefore, Michael Lynn was very nervous at this time. Eric definitely did not dare to touch Robert Shea at this time. Otherwise, Firefly, which had just improved, would definitely fall into turmoil. However, he, as the president who did not have any shares, was likely to become Eric's punching bag. From Robert Shea's character, although the two were good friends, if Eric insisted on venting his anger on him, Robert Shea would definitely not fight to the death with Eric. After fiddling with the tissue in front of him for a while, Eric looked up and said to Michael Lynn, "I'm sorry, Michael. I just suddenly remembered something." "It's okay. Moreover, Eric, I think your marketing method is still very novel. It's comparable to the Lamborghini in Pretty Woman and the advertisement placement in Dark Battle. Those two marketing methods were very successful." Michael Lynn's tone was a little stuttering at first, but later on, it became smooth because these words were not polite compliments but came from the heart. He had been in the film distribution business for more than 10 years and knew that it was not easy to innovate and achieve good results in film marketing methods. "Thank you for your recognition, Michael. By the way, I heard that when Firefly acquired the New Line, you didn't agree with Robert selling it to me, right?" Chapter 350. Michael Lynn was stunned for a moment, but he quickly nodded with a bitter smile on his face. This was not a secret. Many of the old employees from the New Line knew about it. At that time, Michael Lynn hoped that Robert Shea would wait a little longer. Although the New Line was not as profitable as Firefly, it was doing well. Firefly, on the other hand, had nothing except the copyrights to a few blockbuster movies. It was basically an empty shell. Therefore, Firefly's desire for a new line with a perfect distribution channel far exceeded the demand for Firefly. If they could drag it out for a year or so, Firefly would definitely be able to offer a higher price. After the release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robert Shea had expressed his regret to him at a party. If he had followed his suggestion, once Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles became a success, the value of the new line would have at least doubled. But it was too late to say anything now. "Eric, that's true," Michael Lynn nodded and admitted without any intention of defending himself. Eric did not care about Michael Lynn's cold reaction. He smiled and said, "Michael, actually, I can roughly guess why you stopped Robert from selling the new line. But he didn't listen to you. Do you know why?" Michael Lynn raised his head and looked at Eric, waiting for him to take the initiative to continue. Because I told him that there was not much time left for us non-first-tier film companies. If we did not seize the time to expand to a sufficient scale, we would eventually be swallowed up by the film giants. Last year, Columbia Pictures was acquired by the Sony Consortium. Recently, Universal Pictures' parent company, MCA, is about to be acquired by Japan's Matsushita Consortium. At the same time, Warner Pictures and Time Communications merged to form Time Warner. This integration proves that what I said last year was right. Eric, I don't quite understand, Michael Lynn suddenly said. No, you definitely understand. Eric said, you should be able to see the purpose of my acquisition of the new line. In my original plan, the division of labor for Firefly was very clear. Robert would be in charge of the company's operations and movie distribution. We would use the shortest amount of time to expand Firefly's distribution network to the entire world while I would be in charge of the production. From the start, my goal has been to expand the human Firefly as quickly as possible. But now, Robert has gone astray. Michael Lynn lowered his head, unwilling to look into Eric's burning eyes. Eric's gaze did not have the childishness of a young man who had just turned 20. Instead, it carried the oppression of a superior. At some point in time, a piece of paper had landed on his knee. It looked very conspicuous on his gray trousers. Michael Lynn gently raised his arm and patted it again and again. The paper stubbornly stuck to the fabric, so he gave up. Michael, I know that you and Robert have always been very good friends, so I hope you can talk to him. It's not convenient for me to personally deal with this matter, because it would cause a misunderstanding between me and Robert. But you're different. You've been partners for more than 10 years, so he should be able to listen to you. As long as he can put all his energy into what he should be doing, I can even transfer a portion of my shares to him. It's useless, Eric. Michael Lynn finally raised his head and said seriously, I've worked with Robert for so many years, so I know his character very well. It's useless for me to say this. The reason why Robert and I can become friends is because I've never posed any threat to his power. To put it bluntly, I have no right to speak with him. Eric put away the tissue sample box in front of him, took out a document from the filing cabinet beside him, and pushed it in front of Michael Lynn. Then, you can take a look at this first. There was no content on the cover. Michael Lynn suppressed some of the expectations in his heart and turned to the first page. This was an equity transfer agreement, with a quota of 2%. The effective date of the agreement was the end of the year. Before that, the seller could terminate the agreement at any time. Michael, I know that you definitely don't have the cash to buy this 2% of Firefly shares, but I can help you borrow such a sum of money without any legal risks. You must have seen Firefly's financial statements last year. As long as Firefly maintains its current development, you only need to use 2 years of dividends to pay off this loan, and then you'll be one of Firefly's shareholders. Michael Lynn pursed his dry lips and clenched the contract in his hands tightly. Although this 2% of shares didn't seem much, according to Firefly's current profitability, he could get nearly $10 million of dividends every year. This was several times higher than his annual salary, not to mention that this 2% of shares was worth a lot. From Eric's words, he knew that this share was completely free. But there was no free lunch in the world. If he took this share, it meant that he had to completely betray Robert Shea and turn to Eric's side. And not only that, from the additional clause of the agreement that would take effect at the end of the year, it could be seen that if Robert Shea insisted, Eric would kick him out of Firefly at the end of the year. What he had to do was to help Eric stabilize the situation at Firefly at that time, and try to avoid the losses caused by Robert Shea's actions. This was obviously not an easy task. Eric, this is not an easy task, Michael Lynn said in an interfering tone after a few minutes of silence. Well, okay then. Eric nodded and took out another prepared document from the filing cabinet and handed it over. Then, what about this time? When he opened it again, all the conditions were almost the same, but the transfer share was changed to 3%. Michael Lynn's mouth twitched. He wanted to laugh, but he felt that the muscles on his face were stiff and uncomfortable. He wanted to throw the document back in Eric's face. He was a teenager, but he was no longer a young boy. He was no longer as high-spirited as he used to be. Eric, this is my bottom line. Michael and Jeffrey only have 3%. Eric didn't throw out another price this time, because in his heart, Michael Lynn was only worth this price. He had done a detailed understanding of Michael Lynn. The other party was Robert Shea's classmate at Columbia University. He had received a doctorate and entered the industry almost at the same time as Robert Shea. He had more than 10 years of experience in film distribution. After Robert Shea left, Michael Lynn was fully capable of taking over Robert Shea's position. And compared to Robert Shea, who had an excessive desire for power, Michael Lynn was not so ambitious. Only a person with such a character was suitable to stay in the position of Firefly's CEO and assist Eric in developing Firefly. The senior management of a film company generally received a certain percentage of equity as a reward, just like how Eric converted Jeffrey's bonus into 3% equity at the beginning of the year. Since he had chosen Michael Lynn, Eric was basically selling what the other party wanted in advance for a good price. Michael Lynn didn't hesitate for long. He reached out and flicked away the eyesore of confetti on his pants. Then, he raised his head and asked with a smile, "Eric, aren't you afraid that I won't agree in the end and will instead tell Robert about this?" "I rarely do things that I'm not sure about." Eric could see that Michael Lynn had made a decision that met his expectations. He said with a relaxed expression, "You won't get any benefits from telling Robert about this. I don't think Robert will give you 3% of his shares for nothing. At that time, I can only take the risk of violent turmoil in Firefly and drive the two of you away. Do you think you can still create a new line?" Michael Lynn shook his head with a wry smile. "I just think that this is too cruel to Robert. The competition in Hollywood has always been cruel. If I hadn't survived the storm at the beginning of the year, then now, Firefly would have become a vassal of the Big Seven." Michael Lynn sighed. He found a pen on his desk and signed his name on the agreement. Eric quickly handed over another agreement. After signing it, Eric took back the copy. "Then, Michael, from now on, I hope you can use the next 6 months to take control of all the resources in Robert's hands. I believe Robert won't be too wary of you. I don't want any of Firefly's businesses to come to a standstill after Robert leaves. Of course, as for the old employees of the new line, I think they will definitely not choose to leave with Robert after you get promoted at the end of the year and the generous bonus." "I understand." Michael Lynn nodded and picked up the agreement in front of him. "Eric, if there's nothing else, I'll go back to work." "Well, Robert will definitely make another movie in the second half of the year. You have plenty of time to do those things." "I'll try my best to cooperate with you," Eric said again. Seeing Michael Lynn nod and leave, Eric finally heaved a huge sigh of relief. This matter was finally resolved. The reason why Eric was so cautious was not because he was making a mountain out of a molehill. In his previous life, Mira Mike was an example. Because of a conflict with Michael Eisner, the brothers Wayne and Stan left Mira Mike, directly causing Mira Mike's business to come to a standstill. After struggling for a few years, Disney had no choice but to close Mira Mike and sell it off. Even a behemoth like Disney was helpless in the face of its own subsidiary company. The resources in Robert Shea's hands could definitely be said to be on par with Eric's, especially in the area of film distribution. As the two companies had not been merged for long, Eric had not even intervened in the distribution matters. Once Robert Shea left, without any preparation, it was not impossible for Firefly's distribution network to come to a standstill. This was the thing that Eric did not want to see the most. However, with Robert Shea's current performance, Eric could not drag this out any longer. The longer this dragged on, the greater the reaction of Robert Shea from Firefly might be. Chapter 351. After knocking on the door, Alan pushed open the door of Eric's office and saw that Eric was leaning back in his office chair, looking relaxed and tired. "What's the matter?" After Alan approached, Eric straightened up and asked. "When you were discussing things with Mr. Lynn, Mr. Cameron called. He said that Arnold Schwarzenegger insisted on a salary of $13 million US. If we don't agree, Arnold Schwarzenegger will sign a contract with Carlock Pictures for the next movie." Hearing the name Carlock, Eric frowned slightly. Carlock Pictures was one of the most famous poisonous film companies in Hollywood in the early 1990s. In parallel time, Terminator 2 and Instinct both came from Carlock. At the same time, Carlock was also a disruptor of Hollywood's rules. Because the other party was backed by a huge group of German investors, in order to get the contracts of famous Hollywood stars, he wantonly raised the salary. He directly offered a sky-high salary of $15 million to Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger and others who were interested. This price was almost twice as high as the current A-list stars in Hollywood. The increase in the salary of several big stars also led to the rise in the salary of the entire Hollywood stars. It can be imagined how much the 7 major Hollywood film companies hated Carlock. In his memory, Carlock's end was very miserable. In 1995, the pirate film Throat Cut Island, which invested $95 million, only recovered more than $9 million at the box office. The huge loss made Carlock Pictures go bankrupt directly. The reason for this is that the plot of Throat Cut Island itself is full of loopholes, but it was recorded in the Guinness Book of Records. There must be the shadow of the 7 major film companies behind it. It should be known that the rise in the salary of stars led by Carlock made the studio pay hundreds of millions of dollars more to stars every year. If this kind of thing happened to anyone, they would probably want to crush the culprit. I don't know if the script of Throat Cut Island has appeared now. If I can hold such a box office stinking egg in my hand and throw it out at the right time, it will be a quite sharp weapon. Seeing Eric close his eyes as if he was thinking about something, Ellen stood quietly opposite him, patiently waiting for his decision. After thinking about Throat Cutter Island, Eric quickly focused his thoughts on Terminator 2. There was no doubt that in the future, the salary of stars would definitely get higher and higher. Even Cameron, who recognized Schwarzenegger's talent, could only ask Schwarzenegger to make a $2 million concession. Eric believed that he did not have enough chips to make Schwarzenegger make a bigger concession. Of course, since the ultimate culprit behind this wave of star prices was the Germans, Eric had also thought of letting the Germans be the spendthrift. Through Carlock, the original producer of Terminator 2, he would bring in German investors to participate in the production of Terminator 2. Anyway, Terminator 2 was going to be distributed by Firefly. At that time, as long as he did some tricks on the publicity cost and increased the proportion of Firefly's share, it would be enough to keep most of the movie's profits in Firefly. If he was more ruthless, the Germans wouldn't even be able to get back all the money they invested. But in this case, it would involve the copyright of Terminator. If it were other movies, it would be fine, but since Eric had completely obtained the big gold mine of Terminator, he would never allow any unexpected changes to the copyright of this series. Some time ago, he saw the copyright lawsuit of the 007 series in the newspaper. It was said that the lawsuit had been going on for more than 20 years. Eric didn't want Terminator to be involved in such a tangled copyright lawsuit in the future. "I'll call Jim to discuss this matter in person later," Eric said after he sorted out all his thoughts. Ellen nodded and was about to go out when Eric stopped the assistant again. "By the way, help me pay attention to the movie scripts about pirates in the circle. Keep a low profile and don't make it public." "I understand." Ellen smiled and asked, "Is there anything else?" "No, after attending the premiere of Sleeping with the Enemy tonight, I'll be preparing for Shock Point with Ms. Catherine Bigelow, so I won't be coming to the company. Send the important documents directly to the Sharp Corner Manor. If there's an emergency, call my mobile phone." "Don't you need me to follow you?" Ellen asked in confusion. In the past, Eric would bring him along for this kind of thing. Eric shook his head. "No, there's a lot of things to do in the company during this period. I hope you can look after it for me." "Okay then." Ellen nodded and turned to leave the office. The summer vacation came to late June. Firefly's first summer release, The Silence of the Lambs, was released for 2 weeks. The meticulous plot, the superb performances of the actors, and the impact of the topics created by several female producers earned nearly $40 million at the box office in 2 weeks. If it wasn't for the increased budget to meet the schedule, the cost would have been recovered. At the same time, many film critics predicted that this movie would become another Oscar-winning horror movie after The Exorcist, in 1973. Under such circumstances, another thriller film, Sleeping with the Enemy, directed by Julia's Firefly, attracted a lot of attention. In addition, the publicity for Basic Instinct had already begun. This was another crime thriller film. Although some tabloids were jealous that Eric had been assimilated by the New Line's production style because of the acquisition, the keen executives of Hollywood studios were closely watching these three movies. If both Sleeping with the Enemy and Basic Instinct were successful at the box office, Hollywood would definitely increase the production of horror and thriller movies in the next few years. Driven by profits, Hollywood would also follow the trend. However, the copyright protection strategy and production cost restrictions in the West made Hollywood follow the trend less unscrupulously than on the other side of the ocean. In the previous few test screenings of Sleeping with the Enemy, the reviews of the film critics were not too high. Although it could not be said to be a bad movie, it could only be given a mediocre review. Other than Julia's performance, there was nothing else outstanding about it. Of course, with Robert Shaye sparing no effort in public relations, most of the reviews published in the newspapers before the movie's release were positive. In the subsequent test screenings, the good response of the movie among the fans gave Robert Shaye a reassurance. As long as it could sell well at the box office, Robert Shaye did not care what the film critics said. If it were not for the fact that the audience mostly chose movies through the reviews in the newspapers, Robert Shaye probably would not have bothered to do public relations with the film critics. Chapter 352. Eric stayed at Firefly's office until almost 7 o'clock. Instead of returning to Malibu, he drove directly to the premiere theater of Sleeping with the Enemy on Sunset Boulevard. The premiere started at 7 o'clock. When Eric arrived, it was already 7:15. Without staying for too long, Eric hurriedly stepped on the red carpet under the arrangement of the staff. After posing for a few photos with the reporters, Eric walked directly into the theater without answering any questions. He knew that Robert Shaye definitely did not want him to be in the limelight at the premiere of Sleeping with the Enemy. Of course, Eric did not want to be in the limelight either. If it were not for the fact that he was in Los Angeles and did not attend the premiere of Sleeping with the Enemy, which would cause the media to speculate, Eric would not even be interested in attending the premiere of Sleeping with the Enemy. "Hi, Julia. Long time no see. You're so beautiful today." When Eric walked into the theater, he saw that there was an empty seat next to Julia, so he sat down. "Thank you, Eric, but here." Julia pointed at Eric's seat and said hesitantly, "What's here?" Eric asked in confusion. He got up and looked at the seat, but he did not press on anything. "This is my seat. Get off me." Before Eric turned around, he heard Elizabeth say angrily, "Liz, it's you again," Eric said helplessly as he turned to look at Elizabeth. The girl had her hair cut short and was wearing a simple white shirt and black slim-fit trousers. She even had a brown leather belt around her waist. She looked very capable. "Wow, you didn't walk the red carpet in this outfit, did you?" "Why not? Do you think there's something wrong?" Elizabeth raised her chin proudly. Her little feet in black sandals kept pushing Eric to the seat next to her. Eric helplessly moved a seat to the side. When the girl sat down, he said, "It's not just inappropriate. It's basically destroying the venue. It seems like the actress attending the premiere is not wearing an evening gown." "Eric, Liz came in from the side door," Julia suddenly explained. Elizabeth rolled her eyes at Eric before saying to Julia, "Ignore him. The best way to deal with people like him is to ignore them." "Liz, your words really hurt me. Have you forgotten the good times we spent together?" Eric pretended to be aggrieved. "Forgot," said Elizabeth simply. "Sigh, it seems that I should visit your house more often. I haven't seen Mr. Murdoch in a long time. Is he in Los Angeles recently? I still want to thank him in person about The Silence of the Lambs." Elizabeth finally reached out angrily and pinched Eric in the ribs. "I'm warning you, Eric Williams. Don't tell anyone about this, or I'll cut ties with you." All right. What a filial daughter," Eric said with a smile. The Silence of the Lambs earned nearly $40 million at the North American box office in 2 weeks. The total box office in North America may reach more than $130 million. According to the distribution contract signed by TG Film and Firefly, The Silence of the Lambs could bring Firefly no less than $30 million in revenue. This amount of money was at least 15% of Fox's annual profit. If the news that The Silence of the Lambs was given to Firefly by Rupert Murdoch spread, it would definitely affect Murdoch's reputation in News Corporation. It might even become an excuse for other shareholders of News Corporation to attack Murdoch. That was why Elizabeth warned Eric so seriously. Of course, Eric did not intend to publicize this matter. He just wanted to see Murdoch's expression after he learned that The Silence of the Lambs was a box office success. It would be interesting. One more thing, Eric. I have to warn you. Don't force Julia to take on movies she doesn't like in the future. When filming Sleeping with the Enemy, Julia almost couldn't help but see a psychiatrist. It can't be that serious, right? Eric leaned forward slightly to look at Julia and asked. Julia didn't speak, so Elizabeth immediately said, "Of course it's that serious. Because every time she sees the male lead in the script, she thinks of a certain despicable guy." A certain despicable guy? It can't be me, right? Aha. Such a serious topic is not suitable for today's occasion. Let's talk about something else. For example, do you have any plans for your next movie? The two girls rolled their eyes at Eric, but they didn't pursue the matter further. Elizabeth said, originally, TG was just a photo shoot. I've already chosen an office building in Century City. First, I'll set up the company's administrative department, which is responsible for the daily operations. Then, we'll talk about the next movie. So, Firefly must pay us the share as soon as possible. Ahem, you see, talking about money hurts our relationship. I think you should talk to Robert, Eric said jokingly. Humph, don't think I don't know. The original New Line is famous for defaulting to the producers. If you dare to play this game with us, I'll kick Drew out of TG. Wow, then I'd like to see if even I can't drive that little vixen away. I'll bet $1 million that you can try. How about your sharp corner manor? There's no need to bet on that. You can just move there. Let's make it clear first. Marriage is off the table. Elizabeth raised her foot to kick Eric's calf, but Eric, who was already prepared, dodged it with a smile. Okay, you guys, it's about to start, Julia reminded at this time. Eric and Elizabeth both quieted down and stopped fooling around. Julia got up and walked onto the stage with the several main creators of Sleeping with the Enemy. After a short interaction with the audience, the movie soon began. Julia played Laura, who was supposed to be a rich housewife, but because of her husband Martin's suspicious personality, perverted possessiveness, and strong violent tendencies, Laura lived in fear every day. After failing to get rid of her husband through proper means many times, Laura thought of a way to fake her death and escape. One time, while drifting on the sea, Laura pretended to fall into the water and drown. Finally, she got rid of her husband's shackles and escaped to a small town in Iowa to start a new life. However, because of her negligence when escaping, she left behind clues that made Martin realize that Laura was not dead. Martin, who fell into madness, began to search for Laura's whereabouts by any means. This was supposed to be a rather mediocre and simple story, but Julia's excellent acting skills created a very successful image of Laura. Through rich expressions and body language, in just over 10 minutes, the audience had a strong sympathy for Laura, who was enduring her husband's bullying in the film. With Laura's smooth escape, most of the audience breathed a sigh of relief. However, the film wasn't over yet. Martin unexpectedly received a call from Laura's friend when she was alive, which made him realize that Laura might not be dead. Later, Martin also proved this point and began to embark on a crazy journey to find Laura. Immediately, the plot firmly entangled the hearts of the audience. With the ups and downs of the plot, the audience's heartstrings were pulled from time to time. This kind of anxiety lasted for an hour and a half. When Laura finally shot Martin dead in her apartment, all the audience watching the film breathed a sigh of relief. Eric could even hear the low cheers in the theater after Julia shot the gun on the screen. This was obviously a kind of recognition for the movie. Elizabeth, who who had been silently watching the film, glanced at Eric with a faint warning in her eyes. To be honest, I like this plot the most. I've decided to buy a ticket tomorrow and watch it again. It seems that I should add a reminder at the end of the film, purely fictional, do not imitate. It's useless to add it. When I was in college, all my grades were A's. This is enough to prove my learning ability. Liz, it seems that there is a deep misunderstanding between us. This is not good. Let's find a time to have a good talk. Well, you can bring Julia. And a gun. You don't need to bring this. I have a ready-made one. Go to hell. As the two bickered, the lights in the theater lit up, followed by a wave of applause. Chapter 353. In the original plan, Robert Shea planned to wait for 2 weeks after the release of The Silence of the Lambs. When the attendance dropped to a certain extent, he would transfer the 200 to 300 cinemas of The Silence of the Lambs to Sleeping with the Enemy, making 2,000 cinemas for Sleeping with the Enemy. After Pretty Woman and Steel Magnolias broke the 100 million yuan box office in a row, Julia's box office appeal was beyond doubt. Therefore, the movie she starred in could support the release of 2,000 theaters at the same time. Unfortunately, the box office trend of The Silence of the Lambs was far beyond everyone's expectations. The next week's box office fell by less than 20%. With such a good result, even if Robert Shea was willing, the cinemas that signed the tiered sharing contract with The Silence of the Lambs would not be able to replace the movie with Sleeping with the Enemy. Therefore, Sleeping with the Enemy only premiered in 1,700 cinemas. Of course, the release of the movie in 1,700 theaters did not affect the performance of Sleeping with the Enemy at all. After 3 days of release, Sleeping with the Enemy had earned more than $18 million at the box office. This result had already exceeded the standard of a blockbuster movie that had an average box office of $10,000 a week. Although there was already the box office success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the credit for that movie could not be entirely attributed to Robert Shea. Therefore, the first major production produced independently was a success. Robert Shea couldn't wait to start preparing for the celebration banquet after the weekend's 3-day box office results were released. It seemed that he wanted to announce his status to the entire Hollywood. Anyway, Eric already had a plan. Before the end of the year, he did not intend to have any conflict with Robert Shea. Therefore, he readily agreed that Firefly would pay for the celebration banquet at the Hilton Hotel. After Sleeping with the Enemy, Eric no longer went to Firefly's headquarters every day. Although Ghost had entered the final stage of publicity, Eric did not run around doing final publicity for the movie like Nicolas Cage and Bridget Fonda. If he was just a movie director, he would not be able to escape these things. However, as the boss of Firefly, Eric still had this privilege. Several cars stopped outside Dockweiler Beach Park, south of Santa Monica in Los Angeles. The doors opened, and 7 or 8 people got out. Eric skillfully put on his sunglasses and baseball cap before he looked at the beach park with relief. A group of people quickly gathered. Catherine Bigelow, who was wearing a sun hat and a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, said, "This is the place. I've been here once before, but I only took a cursory look. After doing some comparisons over the past few days, I realized that this place is still the best. Let's go in." According to the cold and gloomy tone of Point, this place seems a little too beautiful, Eric said as he followed beside Catherine Bigelow and looked at the surrounding scenery. I plan to film here again. A cloudy day? In Los Angeles, this kind of weather is very rare. Eric shook his head and turned to the cinematographer of Point behind him. Donald, do you have any good solutions? Donald Biederman was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was also an excellent cinematographer. He had participated in the shooting of many excellent movies before. Since the budget for Point Shock was sufficient, Catherine Bigelow and James Cameron had chosen the best crew members. In the early stages of the movie, the cinematographer had to participate in order to confirm that the scene chosen by the director was suitable for shooting. Hearing Eric's words, Donald Biederman narrowed his eyes and looked around. After thinking for a while, he said, "If you want to best match the effect of the movie, of course, I also hope that the scene here can be shot on a cloudy day. However, There are only a few cloudy and rainy days in Los Angeles a year, so it's okay to shoot in the evening. However, in that case, due to the change in light, the suitable time for shooting will be very short. If we can't complete the NG after a few times, we can only wait for the next day. The group of people walked around Dockweiler Beach Park. Under the curious and puzzled eyes of the beach surfers, they wrote and drew as if there was no one else around. From time to time, they made some notes. Donald Biederman also used a portable camera to shoot a few shots at the location that Catherine Bigelow liked. After working for nearly an hour, the group left. They did not communicate with the park management because it was still early to start shooting. According to the plan, Thriller would not start shooting until the end of July at the earliest. After seeing Dockweiler Beach Park, the group quickly drove to the next destination. After running for an entire afternoon, Eric also deeply realized the vastness of Los Angeles County. They ran more than 100 kilometers in a day, but they were still wandering around the streets and alleys of Los Angeles. They did not even reach the suburbs. In the evening, the group finished dinner at a restaurant in Santa Monica before planning to go home. "Hey, Kate, can you wait?" Eric stopped Catherine Bigelow, who was about to drive home. Catherine Bigelow stopped by the car door and asked, "Eric, what's the matter?" "It's like this. Firefly is holding a celebration party for Sleeping with the Enemy at the Hilton Hotel tomorrow. Would you like to come?" Catherine Bigelow shook her head directly. "Sorry, Eric, I don't like to attend this kind of party. I mean, you can go with Jim. A lot of Hollywood executives may come tomorrow. It's very good for expanding your network." Jim went to North Carolina to choose the location for Terminator 2. Catherine Bigelow shrugged. "I can't go alone. You can come with me." "I don't think Jim will mind," Eric said in a relaxed tone. Catherine Bigelow raised her eyebrows and said in a teasing tone, "Little guy, I'm warning you. Don't have any ideas about me." Ahem. Eric did not expect Catherine Bigelow to be so direct. He could not help but cough twice before saying, "Kate, I think you must have misunderstood." "I'm 100% sure that I didn't misunderstand." Catherine Bigelow opened the car door and was about to leave. After thinking about it, she turned around and hugged Eric like a big sister. She patted him hard on the back and said in a coaxing tone, "Okay, little guy. Here, we're choosing the female lead for Point Shock tomorrow. Those young and beautiful girls are the ones you should aim for." Although Catherine Bigelow's light fragrance was very nice, Eric still resisted being coaxed like a child and struggled out of the woman's arms. Okay, but can you stop calling me little guy?" "Of course." Catherine Bigelow smiled and took 2 steps back. She opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat. She waved at Eric. "See you tomorrow, little guy. See you tomorrow." Eric waved at the woman helplessly. He watched Catherine Bigelow drive away in the Chevrolet SUV before getting into his car. He looked at his current expression in the rearview mirror on the windshield and rubbed his cheeks a few times before saying to himself, "She actually said it so bluntly. How embarrassing. But I like this kind of personality." Chapter 354. Eric drove back to the Sharp Corner Manor. Just as he passed through the gate of the manor, a security guard came over and said, "Mr. Williams, Miss Connolly came over in the afternoon." Eric was a little surprised. After they met again at the Coppola family party, Eric had taken the girl into his possession. However, he was not in a hurry to eat Connolly. Anyway, the prey had already fallen into the trap. A year ago, he had scared the girl away because he was too eager. Of course, Eric would not make such a low-level mistake a second time. What's more, compared to a year ago when he had just entered Hollywood, Eric's mentality had changed a lot. At that time, Eric was very curious about everything in Hollywood and did not have much immunity to beautiful women. But now, Eric found that as long as one had enough power and status in Hollywood, beautiful women were at their fingertips. The thing that Hollywood did not lack the most was beautiful women, and even beautiful men. Eric guessed that the high proportion of homosexuals in Hollywood was probably due to the fact that they were tired of playing with beautiful women and started to play with men. After that incident, with Eric's promise, Connolly returned to the Stanford University to study while waiting for news from Eric. But with the start of the filming of Ghost, Eric temporarily put Connolly's matter to the back of his mind. As for Connolly, Eric now had a hunting mentality. Capturing the beautiful women in the memory of his previous life in his hands, one by one, gave him a great sense of achievement. From April until now, it had been nearly 3 months. Eric did not have time to take care of Connolly. The girl obviously could not wait any longer, so she took the initiative to visit him today. Of course, this was also the result that Eric wanted to see. A few months ago, after Connolly received Eric's promise, he quickly returned to Stanford University to continue his studies. He had tried to play hard to get, but unfortunately, Eric didn't buy it at all. He pushed the door open and walked into the villa. Julia Fordham's Comfort of a Stranger was playing from the jukebox in the living room. Hearing this song, Eric couldn't help but smile. He took off his coat and hung it on the hanger. He walked to the sofa in the corner of the hall and soon saw Jennifer Connolly. The girl was lying on the sofa, reading the magazine in front of her intently. It had to be said that a tall and well-proportioned woman looked good in anything. The white short-sleeved t-shirt and simple jeans didn't hide the girl's perfect S-shaped figure at all. There was a coffee on the small coffee table next to the sofa, and a faint mist floated in the air. Together with the music from the record player, the whole scene looked very bourgeois. Eric walked over with light steps and sat on the back of the sofa. He reached out and scratched the girl's slender waist that was exposed between her t-shirt and jeans. Jennifer Connolly, who was suddenly attacked, turned over. She only relaxed when she saw that it was Eric. She sat up on the back of the sofa and looked up at Eric. She smiled and asked, "When did you come back? You gave me a fright." Eric lowered his head and his gaze fell on the girl's t-shirt collar. He didn't see any traces of bra. Her 2 full breasts stood up high, and there were 2 obvious small bumps on the outside of the t-shirt. Touched, he held the girl's face and kissed her. Eric then said, "Just now, what about you?" Although she noticed Eric's gaze, Connolly didn't cover up her collar. She still smiled and said, "After the summer vacation, I stayed with my parents in New York for a while before coming to Los Angeles. It was early June. You just came back from shooting a movie in New York, so we didn't meet. By the way, I couldn't go to your party in New York on your birthday. I'm really sorry." "It's okay. I received your gift. I like it very much. What have you been doing during this period of time?" "Nothing. I spent most of my time in school." Although the girl tried to hide it, the disappointment in her voice still showed. During this period of time, she had been waiting for Eric to help her find a role. Unfortunately, she had waited for 3 months. Occasionally, when she thought of the gap between her and Eric, Connolly couldn't help but worry that Eric had forgotten about her. She had seen in the newspaper that Eric had found another beautiful woman to be by his side. The girl didn't have much interest in studying Stan's courses. The reason why she didn't choose to drop out was because she listened to her agent's advice. The cultural level of Hollywood actresses was generally low. If she could stay in university for a few more years and get the title of a talented woman, it would be very helpful for the development of Hollywood. Even if it didn't help, it could still improve her style. "You're luckier than me. I haven't even been to a university campus in my life." "You've already studied at 2 of the most famous universities in the United States," Eric said as he pulled a lock of the girl's black hair and played with it. The girl curled her lips and said, "But why do I feel like you're laughing at me?" "Of course not." Eric smiled and shook his head. Connolly pulled her hair back from Eric's hand, stood up and said, "I'm going to make dinner. What do you want to eat?" Although he had already eaten, Eric didn't refuse and said, "I remember that there aren't many ingredients in the kitchen. You can cook whatever you want." Connolly nodded and took out a hairband from her trousers pocket. She skillfully tied her shoulder-length hair into a ponytail and walked to the kitchen. Eric thought for a moment and followed her. After a simple dinner, it was already 9 o'clock. There were only the 2 of them in the empty villa. This situation made Connolly a little nervous. The girl knew that something would definitely happen tonight. She didn't want to run away, but she also knew that she definitely couldn't run away. After cleaning up the tableware, the two chatted for a while. Eric seemed to have noticed the girl's uneasiness and suggested, "Why don't we go watch a movie?" Jennifer Connelly remembered the scene when the two of them went to watch a movie a year ago. The girl couldn't remember the name of the movie. At that time, Eric pulled her out from the back of the cinema, but they were still caught by the paparazzi. She blushed and nodded. She knew that at this time, Eric definitely wasn't taking her out to watch a movie. Moreover, the private screening room in the villa was more luxurious than the cinema. He led the girl into the screening room. The rows of lockers by the wall were densely packed with videotapes and various film copies. These were the movies that Eric had been interested in after moving to Malibu. "What do you want to watch?" "There are still many horror movies here," Eric asked with a smile. Chapter 355. Connelly knew that a man would bring a woman to watch a horror movie. She rolled her eyes at Eric and asked, "Do you have Ghost?" "That's your latest movie. I heard that it's a good movie, but I haven't had the chance to go to the cinema recently. If you have, you can watch it." "Oh yes, I also heard that the song in the movie is very good." "Yes, I happened to bring a copy back," Eric said. He walked forward and quickly found a copy of Ghost. After installing it on the film projector, Eric turned off the lights in the screening hall and sat on the sofa with the woman in his arms. Because it was a special copy, there was no opening. The beginning of the movie was a long shot. Whether it was the picture or the soundtrack, it was the soundtrack of the original horror movie. It took more than a minute to create a suspenseful atmosphere. After seeing the opening, 99% of people would think that the whole story would take place in the old house. When the suspenseful atmosphere was created to the extreme, the wall was smashed with a bang. The sudden change in the atmosphere gave people a sense of relief, as if they had come from hell to earth. Eric did not make any changes to the opening of the movie. It had to be said that any movie that had created a box office miracle had its own special features. The opening of Ghost was particularly good at attracting the attention of the audience. Although when they found out that it was a tear-jerking romance movie, many horror movie fans complained that it was a waste of such a good opening, there was no doubt that it took only a minute to firmly capture the audience's attention. It was difficult for such a movie not to be a success. In the first few minutes, the plot was plain and uneventful. Most of the time, it was just a conversation between Sam, Molly, and Carl. However, from their words, one could tell the personalities of the three of them. Sam was an ambitious investment bank manager. Molly was a romantic artist. As for Carl, he was a bit of a businessman. When he saw the vast space behind the wall, the first thing that came to his mind was to sell it and make money. He also expressed undisguised envy for the roadside Lamborghini sports car. He said that one day, he would own such a luxury car. With just a few scenes, Carl's strong desire for money was outlined. This also paved the way for Carl to fall into madness for money. In Hollywood movies, there were often props and small details that hinted at the development of the plot. Many scenes that were originally thought to be useless, after watching, often found that the scene was hinting at something. Compared to Eric, who could not help but look at the movie with the eyes of a director, Jennifer Connelly, who was quietly leaning in the man's arms, focused most of her attention on Bridget Fonda. She could not help but bring herself into the role of Bridget Fonda, imagining what kind of effect she would have if she had acted in some scenes. After watching for nearly 10 minutes, she kept feeling that Bridget Fonda's performance did not seem to be anything special. If she had played Molly, perhaps she could have acted better. Thinking of this, Jennifer Connelly secretly glanced at Eric, who was focused on the screen. Compared to a year ago, she found that she could not understand the thoughts of the man beside her at all. Just like the female lead in Ghost, why was he not willing to give her a try? The plot finally reached the climax of the first episode. In the insomniac night, to the tune of "Oh, My Love," the extremely beautiful scene and the passionate performances of the male and female leads finally brought Connelly into the movie. She felt less conflicted in her mind. After Sam discovered that some of the accounts were abnormal, he changed the passwords, which brought about his own death. Sam, who had turned into a spirit, did not go to heaven. Instead, he drifted in the mortal world, waiting by Molly's side in a daze. Compared to the original Patrick Swayze, Nicolas Cage's performance was much more delicate. He vividly portrayed Sam's hesitation, anxiety, and reluctance after he turned into a spirit. Whoopi Goldberg's appearance added a touch of warmth to this sad story. Not only was the constant chatter of black actors not annoying, but it also gave people a sense of reassurance. Later, Sam discovered the ins and outs of his murder. After a series of twists and turns, Sam finally proved to Molly that he was still alive. The moment the two hugged each other again, the Righteous Brothers' singing seemed to have become heart-wrenching. Eric also saw the glistening tears at the corners of the eyes of the girl in his arms, and he tightened his grip on Connolly. After the movie ended, the girl leaned on Eric and whispered softly, "I really hope they don't end up together in the end." She no longer cared about the female lead's problem in her heart and was instead immersed in a faint sadness. Eric was also moved by the movie's plot at this time. When he heard the girl's words, he said softly, "There will always be regrets. Only incomplete beauty can leave a deep impression on people." In the dim theater, the two were silent for a moment. Their eyes met, and soon they kissed. After a while, the two separated and their eyes met. Connolly suddenly smiled. "I feel like I'm back in reality again." "Welcome back," Eric said with a smile. Of course, he knew what Connolly meant. "Do you want to watch it again?" Connolly shook his head. "No need, I've already memorized all the plot. I have to say, the movie you made is really good." "Thank you for the compliment," Eric said. He stood up and took down the film of Ghost from the projector. He looked at Connolly and said, "What should we watch next?" Connolly thought about it and said to Eric, "Let's go with The Kid in Charge. The second one. I've watched the first one, and I feel that it's something for children to watch. I feel that the second one is more suitable for adults and children to watch together." Eric nodded. While looking for the film of Ghost in Charge 2, he said, this sequel originally wanted to enter the adult market. In the future, the third and fourth one may be even more so. The morning sun shone into the bedroom. Eric woke up and looked at Connolly, who was curled up in his arms like a cat. Jennifer Connolly quickly woke up when she felt Eric's movements. "Good morning, baby." "Morning," the girl said lazily. She looked at Eric and said, "How about we get up?" "Let me hug you for a while," Eric said softly. Chapter 356. Seeing that Eric had no intention of letting go of him, Connolly nodded and did not say anything else. "It's getting late, look outside," Connolly said after a while, looking out of the window. Eric looked at his watch and remembered that he had to choose the female lead for Flashpoint today. As for the two male leads, Catherine Bigelow had already been decided. They were Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. Keanu Reeves had already begun to prepare for his role by joining a Los Angeles police station to experience life. Looking at the girl in his arms, Eric quickly made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed Catherine Bigelow's number. He casually found a reason to say that he would not be attending the audition for the female lead today and would let Catherine Bigelow decide for herself. Of course, he was inevitably teased by Catherine Bigelow. The woman thought that her straightforward words yesterday made Eric too embarrassed and avoided her. After hanging up the phone, Eric said to Connolly, who had been listening, "Okay, there's nothing else today. We have the whole day." Connolly shrank his neck and asked, "You seem to be talking about the casting just now?" "Yes, I'm personally producing a movie called Flashpoint. It's a police and gangster movie. Although it tells the story of a few criminals and undercover agents who robbed British Airways, this movie is more about parkour and extreme sports. It will be very cool after it's produced. You can watch it in the future," Eric casually explained. Noticing the girl's expression, Eric quickly realized what she was thinking and explained, "The female lead of this movie is not suitable for you. Catherine Bigelow wants a wild character, and you don't have that temperament." Connolly was a little embarrassed that Eric saw through his thoughts, but he heard Eric continue, "There's a good opportunity tonight. Robert is organizing a celebration party for the box office success of Sleeping with the Enemy. There will be many Hollywood producers there. I'll help you ask if there are any suitable movies for you. I'm sure there are still many people in Hollywood who are willing to give me face. Actually, you don't have to be in such a hurry. The girl was a little reserved. Soon, she couldn't help but ask, "Do you have plans for your next movie?" "It's a story about tornado. We'll have to wait until the special effects problem is solved before we can start shooting." "It's likely that we'll have to wait until next spring," Eric said casually. He didn't explain too much. The girl definitely wouldn't be as interested in his huge plan as Cameron. Eric had already given the role of the heroine of Tornado to Joanna Pakula. The actress was now having an oral class. Although she had been in the United States for so many years, Joanna's oral English was still not up to standard. Although Eric was inexplicably fond of the intonation of the actress when she said, "I'm sorry," the heroine of Tornado was, after all, a native of the United States. If she spoke with a European immigrant's accent, it would be a joke. In addition, the filming of Tornado would have to wait until next spring at the earliest. In order to reduce the time that the huge amount of money would be spent on the project, the filming was postponed until next summer. This was the rule for many Hollywood movies. Tornadoes were frequent in spring and summer. If they chose to film in autumn and winter, it would be a test of the North American audience's IQ. With the current level of special effects, the outdoor scenes definitely couldn't be faked. Including the post-production special effects, the production cycle of Tornado would be as long as a year. It would be completed in 1991. As a popcorn movie, it would definitely be released in the summer of 1992. In this way, Eric's frequency of directing movies would return to the normal level of most directors 1 or 2 years. In these 2 years, Eric couldn't spend all his energy on Tornado. In the second half of the year, the Camerons, Terminator 2, and Thriller needed his personal attention. After these 2 projects were completed, the special effects problem of Tornado would definitely be solved. At that time, he would start preparing for Tornado. Of course, although special effects movies would become mainstream in the future, Eric's main energy would also be focused on the production of special effects movies. However, Eric wouldn't give up on short production cycles and high returns. However, he planned to learn from Spielberg's work model. He would personally direct a movie and act as a producer for many movies. Jennifer Connelly saw that Eric's mind began to wander after saying one sentence. She was slightly dissatisfied. "Eric, what are you thinking about?" Eric realized that he had neglected the beautiful woman in his arms. He said, "Nothing." "Then let's get up." Connelly wanted to sit up, but she was pulled into Eric's arms again. "I just cancelled today's work. You must have nothing to do, right?" Connelly smiled and said, "But, Eric, I'm hungry." Eric looked at the woman's expression and had no choice but to give up. He said, "Okay, what do you want to eat? Or we can go out to eat. There are many good restaurants in Malibu." "Aren't you afraid of being seen by others?" Jennifer Connelly asked with a smile. "Another one. You're really busy." That night, in the Hilton Hotel's banquet hall, this was the first sentence that Elizabeth said when she saw Eric. Eric looked at the back of the woman who was walking to the bathroom before turning to Elizabeth. "Of course. Especially when I hear someone complaining like a resentful wife, I feel quite accomplished." "Ha, resentful wife? Are you talking about me?" Elizabeth laughed as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. Eric shrugged and said, "Everyone knows who it is. I'm just curious. Why do I seem to see you everywhere?" "This is the celebration party for Sleeping with the Enemy. I'm good friends with Julia. Isn't it reasonable for me to appear here?" Elizabeth explained clearly. "It seems quite reasonable, but it also feels weird." Eric said honestly, "Between the two of you, our business is none of your business." Elizabeth immediately interrupted Eric's speculation and said, "I just overheard you talking to Brooks about a movie?" Eric had no intention of hiding anything. He said honestly, "Yes, I want to find a suitable female lead for Jenny." Elizabeth curled her lips and said, "How many people are you planning to harm this time?" Eric was baffled. I don't understand what you're talking about. Chapter 357. The Polish actress who was always by your side a while ago, I think her name is Joanna Pakula, right? Elizabeth reminded him. Eric nodded. And then? Because of you, that woman received many offers from film companies. However, all the scripts that were handed to you through that woman's agent were rejected by you. You haven't forgotten about this, have you? No. Eric seemed to understand something, but he wasn't sure. I had other plans for Joanna, and there weren't any outstanding stories in those scripts. Did something happen after that? I heard about it by chance. The projects that passed through your hands were all axed. All of them? Eric asked in disbelief. Elizabeth nodded. She looked at Eric with a strange look in her eyes. It shouldn't be wrong. You have to know that for standard film studios like the Big Seven, most film projects start from the moment the producer receives a script. It takes months or even years of twists and turns before the film company can officially start preparing for the project. In the end, because of a few words of yours, the project that they've been working on for so long instantly went up in smoke. You're not optimistic about it. So, how many people are you planning to harm by finding a role for your woman this time? Eric didn't answer Elizabeth's last question. Instead, he asked, Has my impression of you changed that much? Elizabeth rolled her eyes and said helplessly, Now, a lot of people are attributing the box office success of The Silence of the Lambs to you. I think it's the same for Sleeping with the Enemy. Although I know that this project was single-handedly handled by Robert Shea, people who don't know the inside story definitely don't think so. Up until now, none of your movies have failed. Isn't that reason enough for people to be superstitious? Eric unconsciously scratched his cheek and muttered in a low voice, Seems like it's a bit too much. What did you say? Elizabeth leaned closer and asked. I said your gown tonight is really beautiful, Eric looked up and replied. Elizabeth proudly raised her chin and said, Do I need you to tell me that? This is Chanel's latest summer collection. Ah. Bah, that's not what you were talking about. Have fun, Eric said to Elizabeth casually when he saw Connolly walking in. Then, he walked towards Connolly. Elizabeth glared at Eric indignantly. She flicked her short blonde hair and walked into the crowd. You're back. Follow me. I just saw Columbia's vice president, Amy Pascal. She must have a project for Columbia in the second half of the year. I'm quite familiar with her. Eric held Connolly's arm and walked towards Amy Pascal. The men and women standing beside Amy Pascal all stopped talking and looked at Eric. Among them, only Amy knew Eric. After approaching, Amy Pascal took the initiative to greet him. Hello, Eric. Amy, long time no see. This is my girlfriend, Jennifer Connolly. Eric shook Amy's hand and introduced her to Connolly. Nice to meet you, Miss Connolly. You're really beautiful. I think I've seen your movies, Amy Pascal said to Connolly warmly. Connolly was inevitably a bit reserved when she heard Eric introduce her as the vice president of Columbia. However, she still shook hands with Amy Pascal generously and said, Thank you. You're also very beautiful, Ms. Pascal. Amy Pascal smiled and nodded. After exchanging pleasantries with Connolly, she turned her attention back to Eric. She took the initiative to introduce a few people around Eric. They were all executives of Hollywood film companies or famous producers. If it had been more than a year ago, Eric would have wanted to make friends with these people very much. But now, Eric didn't have to deliberately do this. The rise of Firefly was inevitable. Eric had no lack of funds and channels, so he became the target of many Hollywood producers. Of course, if he had a good movie project, he would first think of the Big Seven. However, Firefly's position in these people's hearts was not much lower than that of the Big Seven. It was even much higher than the declining MGM. They chatted for a while. Eric asked, Amy, do you have a movie project in your hands now? The kind that hasn't been decided yet? Amy Pascal keenly glanced at Connolly and smiled. Yes, but Eric, can you consider starting the sequel of Dark War? In that case, all the roles can be decided by you. Columbia will fully cooperate with you. Let's talk about this later. You should know that I'm too busy now. Eric shook his head. Because of last year's contract, the copyright of Dark War was shared by Columbia and Firefly. After the box office success of this version of Dark War, Columbia had been lobbying Eric to start the sequel of Dark War. However, Eric really had no interest in the sequel. After Columbia contacted Tom Hanks, Hanks also said that if Eric didn't participate in the production of the sequel, he wouldn't join either. This matter was delayed. Amy Pascal heard Eric's refusal and didn't mention it again. She was just casually saying it without any hope. Of course, if Eric suddenly agreed, the producer of this project in Columbia would definitely fall on her head. This would definitely be a great help to her career. Bypassing the topic of Dark War, Amy Pascal sized up Jennifer Connelly and said, "I have a comedy in my hands. The female lead is very suitable for Miss Connelly. Tomorrow, I'll have someone send the script. Send it. Send it to Sharp Corner Manor. I'll see if the role is suitable for Jenny," Eric said. He didn't immediately agree. If the script wasn't good enough, Eric could also postpone it. This way, he wouldn't owe her a favor. "No problem, I'll have someone send the script tomorrow," Amy Pascal said with a smile. "But Eric, even if you don't like it, you can't talk nonsense." Eric was stunned. He remembered what Elizabeth had just said to him. He laughed self-deprecatingly and shook his head. "It seems that you all know about it. I actually just heard about it. But last time, I really didn't mean to. I didn't expect those scripts to all be cut." Chapter 358. The people around him laughed. The fat guy, who seemed to be a producer from Fox, said, "Eric, I also have a few scripts. Why don't I send them to the Sharp Corner Manor tomorrow? Help me take a look. These projects are still under consideration. If you can pick one out, the female lead will be Miss Connelly." As soon as the fat guy finished speaking, the other people who were watching the show keenly realized that this was a very good opportunity. Although it was not easy to get Eric to write the script himself, it was very profitable to get Eric to help choose the script. All they had to do was pay the female lead. "Eric, I'm here. Eric, tomorrow I'll get someone to..." Realizing this, the executive producers around him immediately put down their reservations and took the initiative to recommend. "How can you guys do this?" Amy Pascal, who was pushed aside, complained helplessly. Noticing that a lot of people at the party were looking over curiously, Eric gestured to the people around him to keep quiet. The people in front of him were all smart people. They knew that if the news spread, they would not have much of a chance, so they tactfully shut their mouths. "How about this? You can send the script over for me to take a look, but if you want me to help choose, I need to take 30% of the investment. Of course, I'll only invest and won't interfere with other things." The few people looked at each other and nodded at the same time. If Eric participated in the investment, this gimmick could be used for publicity in the future. As an investor, they definitely couldn't say anything if they gave him the role of an executive producer. Eric quickly saw through their thoughts and immediately said, "I'll invest in Jenny's name. Let me say this first, the production of the movie has nothing to do with me. You can't use my name for publicity." After a brief hesitation, everyone quickly agreed. Eric was personally responsible for choosing the script and participating in the investment of the movie. He even let his woman be the female lead. This fully showed his affirmation of the movie. If they screwed up in the end, they could only blame themselves. After discussing this matter, Eric quickly probed, "By the way, why did those scripts get cut last time? I don't believe it was because I said too much." Everyone looked at Jennifer Connelly in unison. The girl shrank her neck innocently, not understanding what had happened. Amy Pascal smiled and said, "Eric, don't try to quibble. Although there are some other factors, those projects were cut because of you." Eric shrugged. "All right, then what are the other factors you mentioned?" Amy Pascal said, "Cut production. I don't know what the other film companies are planning, but Columbia has already decided to cut production. Pat, what about you? It's the same for our show, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. Mr. Ross thinks that the possibility of a fight is low. I think the possibility of a fight is very high. Eric interrupted. I'm sorry, everyone. Can you explain? Amy saw Eric's expression and said, Eric, if you pay attention to the recent international news, you should find that the situation in the Middle East is very tense. The federal government may use force against Iraq in the next year. If that's the case, the public's attention will definitely be focused on the war. The film companies will have to cut production. Eric was shocked. The Gulf War. He almost forgot about such an important time. Seeing Eric suddenly in a daze, Amy asked with concern, Eric, are you okay? In fact, the war might not necessarily start. After so many wars, the public's anti-war sentiment is still very high. Bush can't completely ignore the public's opinion and force a war. I'm fine. Sorry, excuse me. Eric forced a smile and pulled Jennifer Connelly, who was beside him. The two of them walked out of the crowd. Eric, what's wrong? Eric continued to walk out with the woman and said, Jenny, we have to go back. I suddenly remembered something very important. Jennifer Connelly nodded obediently. After she and Eric said goodbye to some people, the two quickly left the Hilton Hotel. Back at the Sharp Corner Manor, Eric told the woman to go to sleep. He then found the recent newspapers and went directly into the study. After spending an hour or two, he carefully read all the international news several times. Sure enough, during this time, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other newspapers had a lot of news about the Middle East. Eric could roughly sort out the context. The matter was very simple. Iraq and Iran fought the Iran-Iraq War for 8 years until the second half of 1988. The result of the war was a lose-lose situation. At the same time, it caused Iraq to be in debt. It owed tens of billions of dollars in loans to countries in the Middle East. Iraq owed Kuwait $14 billion. It was impossible for Iraq to pay back this money. In the end, Iraq used the reason that their war with Iran was a contribution to the entire Arab world and demanded that Kuwait cancel the debt. Kuwait, of course, did not agree. In the end, the two sides began to negotiate. Now that the negotiations had reached the final stage, the war between the two countries was almost imminent. Obviously, from the news in the newspaper, the United States had decided to intervene. Of course, it was impossible for the United States to not intervene. Iraq's attempt to persuade countries in the Middle East to reduce oil production and increase oil prices directly affected the interests of the United States. Of course, this was only what he knew now. According to the memories from his previous life, the negotiations finally broke down. Following that, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Saddam only took 8 hours to conquer the whole of Kuwait and declared Kuwait as Iraq's 19th province. It should have happened on August 2, 1990. There was only a little more than a month left. Half a year after Kuwait was occupied, on January 17, 1991, the Gulf War broke out. The United Nations, led by the United States, only took 42 days to conquer the whole of Kuwait. During the Gulf War in his previous life, Eric was already in junior high school. Although he was not as ignorant as a child, he was not as concerned about current affairs as he was when he was in university. Most of the information about the war was obtained after school. Occasionally, he would watch the news with the adults, or from other people's discussions. Therefore, this part of the memory was very fragmented. However, as long as he remembered a few key dates, it was enough. Although he was a butterfly in this dimension, he believed that with his current strength, he would not be able to affect the course of the war. Therefore, he could use his memory to obtain as much benefit as possible from the war. Chapter 359. Jennifer Connelly woke up very early. Looking at the empty side of the bed, the girl realized that Eric had not returned to the bedroom to sleep all night. This discovery made her a little disappointed. The two had sex the night before yesterday. According to common sense, the man should be very obsessed with her body during this time. However, Jennifer Connelly quickly found a reasonable reason to comfort herself. Judging from the way Eric left the party in a hurry last night, something important must have happened. Although she thought so, the girl was still a little absent-minded. After a simple wash, she did not even change her clothes and walked downstairs in her spaghetti strap nightgown. After walking around the villa, she did not see Eric in the kitchen, the gym, or the terrace. The girl then remembered that Eric had walked into the study on the basement floor last night when he came back. It was the room with the most stringent security. The other rooms in the villa had ordinary door locks. Most of the time, they were not locked and could be entered by pushing the door. Only that room had the most advanced password lock. Even the door was a special alloy security door. Although she was curious about the contents of the room, Jennifer Connelly still knew her limits. Eric did not take the initiative to take her in, and she did not ask. Standing at the door of the study and hesitating for a while, Jennifer Connelly did not know if she should disturb Eric. Perhaps Eric had finished dealing with things last night and went straight to bed in the study. It was only 5 o'clock in the morning. People who were suddenly woken up after staying up late were very bad-tempered. However, Jennifer Connelly soon felt that with her waiting in the bedroom, the possibility of Eric sleeping in the study was very small. Although they had not been together for long, Jennifer Connelly had figured out some of Eric's little habits. For example, he liked to hug women when he slept. The night before, because she was not used to it, she escaped from Eric's arms several times. However, she was subconsciously pulled back by the sleeping man. What could there be in the study room? Could it be that he slept with a few big books? This idea made the girl feel a little funny and proud. She made up her mind to press the doorbell. "Jenny." Eric's voice came from the intercom next to the doorbell. There was a hint of tiredness in his plain voice. "It's me, Eric. I just wanted to see if you were inside." "Oh, it's already 5 o'clock." Eric's voice came from the walkie-talkie again. He then said, "Baby, can you prepare breakfast for me and send it over? I still have some things to deal with." Seeing that Eric didn't even open the door, the girl made a face at the walkie-talkie and said, "Okay, I'll go now." In the study, Eric once again looked at the several pages of dense text on the manuscript in front of him. This was the memory of the Gulf War that he had racked his brains to search for last night. If this data was leaked out and proved to be written at the end of June 1990 instead of some fake charlatans, it would definitely cause a great uproar in the future. Therefore, these things shouldn't have been written down. The reason why they appeared on the paper was because Eric needed a clear context. The memories of the Gulf War in his previous life were quite fragmented. Eric could only list out a timetable and then think of all the bits and pieces of the Gulf War that he had heard about in his 40 years of life in his previous life. To be as safe as possible, Eric deliberately wrote it in Chinese. Even the data was in Chinese characters and didn't use any Arabic numerals. The human brain didn't have a search engine like the internet. Although the memories of his previous life were imprinted in his mind like a hard drive, it was still a very messy hard drive with a lot of information. Even if the data was categorized and stored in different partitions in the real world, if there was too much data, it would be quite troublesome to find a file. It was even more difficult to find information about the Gulf War that he didn't care too much about from the sea of memories of his previous life. Because of the excessive use of his brain to search for information, Eric still felt a little dizzy. If he didn't realize that this was a great opportunity for him, the strong excitement offset most of the fatigue. Eric reckoned that he would have already fainted. After looking at the organized information again, Eric put the thin pages into a file and stuffed them into the safe in the study. He didn't plan to take these pages out of the study. The organized information was already in his mind. As long as he occasionally took it out and looked at it, Eric was sure that he wouldn't forget it. When the matter was over, he would immediately destroy these things. After changing a new password for the safe and locking it, Eric relaxed and stretched his body before returning to the study table. In addition to a large pile of newspapers, there were several open books on the table. Basic Futures Knowledge, Introduction to Oil Futures, and a Financial Terminology Handbook. He had asked someone to buy them overnight and delivered them to the villa at 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday. Regarding this war, the biggest opportunity was, of course, the oil futures. In his memory, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, the price of crude oil in the international market soared from around $20 to $40 in just 2 months. Of course, Eric didn't want to rely on these introductory books to play the oil futures market. Professional things had to be done by professionals. Reading these books was just to know what professionals were doing when they did something, so that he could appropriately point them in the right direction. Eric then picked up some newspapers that contained important information and put them into a briefcase. These were the reasons for his inference about the war in Kuwait. It was much better to have such a cover than to say it out loud and be misunderstood as a hothead. After tidying up the desk, Eric sat down again and picked up the Financial Terminology Handbook to read. After only a few minutes, a bunch of unfamiliar words in the handbook made Eric feel a sense of confusion. At the same time, he also understood why there were so many Westerners with dyslexia: Tom Cruise, Steven Spielberg, Jennifer Aniston, Marlon Brando, Keira Knightley, Whoopi Goldberg. For the Chinese futures terms, which belong to hieroglyphics, people could roughly guess the meaning based on the surface meaning of the words open, close, long, and short. But for the English words, which were a long string of letters, there was no basis for people to guess. They could only be confirmed by a thick dictionary or a glossary. Chapter 360. Jennifer Connelly rang the doorbell again with breakfast in her hands. This time, the door opened directly. The woman looked inside curiously before walking in. She walked up the spiral staircase to the study. Looking at the drafts on the wall, she was as surprised as many people who walked into this study for the first time. "Eric, where is the breakfast?" The woman looked around and asked. Eric got up and walked to the sofa in the corner. He pointed to the coffee table next to him and took a sip of milk. Only then did Eric notice that Jennifer Connelly was just sitting next to him. She was looking at him with her right hand on her knee and her chin on her hand. "Jenny, have you eaten?" The woman shook her head and said with a smile, "I'll just have an apple later." Eric just nodded and didn't say anything else. Women definitely didn't listen to advice in this regard. It was often harder to get a woman to stop losing weight than to get her real money. "Eric, didn't you sleep last night?" After a while, Jennifer Connelly couldn't help but ask when she saw that Eric was eating with relish and seemed to be in a good mood. Eric swallowed the food in his mouth and said, "I took care of some things. By the way, I may be going to New York for a few days. Amy Pascal and the others should be sending the script that we discussed last night. You can just wait at the manor." Jennifer Connelly moved her body closer and looked at Eric expectantly. "It'll be too boring if I stay here alone. I want to go to New York with you." Eric shook his head and said seriously, "I have something important to do this time. I won't be able to accompany you if you go with me. It'll definitely be more boring than staying at home alone. How about this? After I'm done with this, I'll take you to New York to play when I'm free." Jennifer Connelly tugged at the corner of Eric's t-shirt to express her dissatisfaction. After a while, seeing that Eric had no intention of relenting, she reluctantly gave up. After eating breakfast, Eric finally felt a bit sleepy. He got up and helped the waitress clean up the tableware. Eric looked at the time. It was only 6:30. After calculating for a bit, he decided to rest for a few hours. Having lived 2 lives, Eric was very clear that his body was the most important thing. "I'm going to take a nap. Wake me up at 10. Jennifer Connelly, who was about to go jogging in the manor, gave him a meaningful look. "Do you need a pillow?" Eric was stunned for a moment before he quickly understood. He looked at the girl who had just changed into a tight sports singlet and shorts and said with interest, "Sure." Jennifer Connelly opened her arms and winked at Eric. "Then I'll do it myself." Eric didn't say anything else. He went up and picked Jennifer Connelly up. Amidst the girl's crisp laughter, he walked upstairs. The girl didn't hear the alarm clock. When she woke up, it was already 11 o'clock. She hurriedly put on her clothes and went downstairs. She quickly found Eric's figure. The man was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window by the sea, holding a cordless phone in his hand and walking back and forth. Only when she got closer did she hear the content of Eric's words. "I'm not on the blacklist. I'm at home right now. I'll give you the account in the afternoon or evening. It should be the account of Firefly Investment Company. I told you about this company before, the one that owns Cisco shares. Don't worry, it'll only take a month. I promise. That's all, I still have a few calls to make. I'll hang up first." Eric hung up the phone. Just as the girl was about to go over, she saw Eric quickly dial another number. "Hello, Stan? I'm Eric. I've been good recently. Here's the thing, I have something to tell you. Doesn't the digital domain account still have some money? I have something very important to do recently, so I want to borrow it temporarily. Don't worry, in 3 months at most, I'll transfer all the money back to the digital domain account. Don't you believe me?" Okay, I know, but don't keep too much, I really have something very important to do. So, that's all, you can ask the accountant at Digital Domain to calculate the financial situation first. I'll send the account to you then. So, that's all, goodbye. Oh, I'll go over when I have time, but I've been really busy recently. Goodbye. After that, Connolly heard something similar again. Although she wasn't quite sure what was going on, Jennifer Connolly understood that Eric was probably withdrawing funds from a company called Digital Domain. After a few more similar calls, Eric put the cordless phone back in the card slot. Seeing Jennifer Connolly standing nearby, Eric walked up to her, hugged her waist, and kissed her. Then, he said without stopping for a moment, "Jenny, I'm going to Firefly's headquarters now. I might go directly to New York after that. You can stay here for the next few days." After that, Eric picked up a small suitcase on the side. Jennifer Connolly stepped forward to help the man carry another small satchel and followed Eric out of the villa. A black MPV was already parked outside. The driver came over to take Eric's suitcase and put it in the trunk. Eric was about to get into the car when he quickly remembered something. He took out a credit card from his wallet and handed it to Connolly. "If you're tired of staying in the manor, you can go shopping and buy anything. You don't have a place to stay in Los Angeles, right? Go pick a villa yourself. Hollywood Hills, Beverly Hills, or Malibu will do. Use this card to pay. I'm leaving. Goodbye." She felt Eric stuff the card into her hand and kiss her on the cheek. Then, he got into the black MPV and drove away. It took Connolly a while to react. She remembered what Eric said just now. The woman looked at the Citibank credit card in her hand and thought for a while to confirm that she didn't hear wrongly. "What, all the liquid funds? Eric, you can't do that." In the conference room, after hearing Eric's words, Robert Shea was the first to stand up and object. "Eric, although we don't have any more movies to release during the summer break other than Ghost, the overseas distribution of Sleeping with the Enemy and Ghost will require money. Oh right, there's also the promotional video for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as well as the production plan for the second half of the year." Eric knew that compared to the other companies that were completely under his control, Firefly was definitely not a matter that could be settled over the phone. However, he didn't intend to argue with Robert Shea for too long. Therefore, he quickly interrupted Robert Shea. "Robert, I'm not going to take away all the funds. I think I've made it very clear just now. I only need to use this money for a month. After about a month, I'll slowly make up for it. Also, I'm not negotiating with you. Do you understand?" Chapter 361. In the face of Eric's sudden aggression, Robert Shea's expression turned ugly, but his imposing manner also weakened a little. Unwilling to give up, he asked, "Eric, can you at least tell me what you're going to do with the money?" Eric shook his head without hesitation. "Sorry, Robert, I can't say." The muscles on Robert Shea's face twitched a few times in anger, and he quickly said, "Eric, if you insist on doing this, I think my next movie may need external investment." "No problem." Eric readily agreed. Robert Shea had the same idea as when he set up Black Ant Films. He wanted to use Firefly's distribution channel to earn more profits. The so-called external investment was most likely just Robert Shay's personal investment. It seemed that the box office success of Sleeping with the Enemy had made Robert Shay even more arrogant. However, this was also good. Anyway, Eric had already made up his mind to kick Robert Shay out at the end of the year. Even if he used Firefly's distribution channel, it would only be this time. Moreover, whether or not he could make money was another matter. Hearing Eric agree so readily, Robert Shay hesitated. He quickly added, "Of course, Firefly will still participate in part of the investment. I won't let our company suffer too much." Eric sneered in his heart. Robert Shay still had some self-awareness left. Although he said that he wouldn't let the company suffer, it was more because he didn't want the movie to be completely separated from him. This way, for his own benefit, he couldn't ignore the movie. If the movie sold well, all the credit would belong to Robert. If it failed, Robert Shay could also find an excuse to deal with it. However, Eric nodded again. "That works too. That's it then. I'll go to work first." Robert Shay looked meaningfully at Firefly's CFO, Carolyn Elliott, who had been waiting by the side. He got up and left the conference room. "Eric, are you really going to take all the company's money?" Only the two of them were left in the conference room. Carolyn Elliott pushed the glasses on the bridge of her nose and asked with uncertainty. Eric nodded and asked, "How much money do we have in the company's account now?" Carolyn Elliott handed over the folder in her hand. "A total of US $149. 5 million. Eric opened the folder and muttered, "Why is it so little?" Carolyn Elliott rolled her eyes. How was this little? Even the Big Seven might not have such a huge cash flow. "Eric, it's already a lot. This is because the company's share of the US $75 million box office sales at the beginning of the month. Otherwise, the company's account would only have about US $70 million. Although the end of last year's had a few movies, US $150 million in taxes in April. Ants. With the money, the company's is, The X-Files, and Who Will to Be a Millionaire? S. 2. X. 2. Eric quickly flipped through the detailed income and expenditure report. Only then did he understand that Carolyn Elliott was telling the truth. Firefly was in a period of rapid development. Like many companies in this period, they consumed a lot of money. If it weren't for the box office sales of Eric's movies providing enough money for Firefly, Firefly would have inevitably embarked on the path of external financing. How about this? Leave US $9. 5 million in liquid funds. When I get the news, I'll transfer the rest to the designated account, Eric said as he closed the report. Carolyn Elliott hesitated. Eric, US $9. 5 million is definitely not enough. The second season of Friends is already in production. According to the cost of producing 8 episodes per month, each episode costs US $1 million. That's 8 million. Not to mention, the company still needs other expenses. After the success of the first season, the cost of the second season of Friends had also skyrocketed. The cost of each episode had reached US $1 million. Thinking of the sweet face that he hadn't seen for a long time, Eric showed a brief hesitation, but he quickly said, "It's only a month, Carolyn. Besides, it's impossible that we don't have any income this month. Aren't the videotapes of the movies on the market at the end of the year? Also, you can negotiate with Fox to see if you can get some of the advertising revenue from Who Will Be a Millionaire in advance. If there's no other way, then we can suspend production." Carolyn Elliott couldn't help but push up the glasses on her nose bridge again. She frowned slightly and wanted to say something, but when she saw Eric's expression, she swallowed the words that she wanted to say. After finalizing the funding matter, Eric quickly boarded the flight to New York. The headquarters of Firefly Investment Company was located in a building in the business center of Manhattan. The company's main asset was 23% of Cisco's shares. In addition, Chris was also responsible for Eric's private wealth management work. Although he had received a call before, when Eric arrived in New York, it was not yet noon, which surprised Chris Hansen a little. The two of them went to the office together. Eric took out the newspapers that he had sorted out last night and pushed them in front of Chris. He briefly explained his thoughts. Chris listened to Eric's analysis. Although it was a little amateur, it was to the point. He nodded from time to time. When Eric finished, he said, "Eric, during this period, because of the situation in the Middle East, crude oil futures have indeed continued to rise. If you are interested, you can invest US $10 million to play with it." Chris, do you think I flew to New York in such a hurry just to play? Chris looked at Eric and couldn't help but sit up straight. He had a bad feeling in his heart. Eric pressed his arm on the table and leaned forward slightly. He stared at Chris and said seriously, "Chris, before I came, I have already contacted all the liquid funds in Firefly, Pixar, and Digital Domain. The specific data is still being calculated. I estimate it to be around US $200 million. In the next month, I will continue to raise funds with all my strength." "So?" Chris asked in an uncertain tone. "I want to bet big," Eric replied. "US $200 million. All long crude oil futures." "Eric, I think you need to calm down. Have you been bewitched by someone?" Chris reached out and found a copy of the newspaper that Eric handed over. He pointed to a data article in the financial section and said, "You see, in the past 3 months, crude oil prices have risen from US $14 to US $18 per barrel. Most statistical agencies expect that even if the situation in the Middle East falls into a stalemate again, crude oil prices will not exceed US $20 per barrel. If you entered the market 3 months ago, you would have made a lot of money, but no one can predict the future. Now that oil prices have reached US $18, it will definitely fluctuate between US $18 and US $20. The risk of entering the market is very high." "What if the Middle East goes to war?" Eric asked. Chris remembered what Eric said when he first came and realized that Eric had been hinting at the possibility of another war in the Middle East through the information in the newspapers in front of him. "That's even more impossible." "Eric, who will fight who?" Chris asked. "The military strength of the Arab countries in the Middle East is generally not high. Take Saudi Arabia for example. It has millions of square kilometers of land and only 70,000 soldiers. Small countries like Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar are almost non-existent. And Iraq, the country most likely to start a war, has just been fighting with Iran for 8 years. Its domestic economy is about to collapse. Saddam is not a fool. Don't think that he is showing off to small countries like Kuwait and the UAE, and even slandering Kuwait for stealing Iraq's oil. At most, he is extorting some benefits like before. Of course, Saddam is not a fool, but he is crazy. Chris, think about it. If Iraq invades Kuwait, what will happen? You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.